Jaime Lannister stood at the window of his solar in the Red Keep, gaze drifting out over the sprawl of King's Landing. The sun was low behind the walls, painting the sky with a wash of pale orange and deeper reds that reminded him uncomfortably of spilled blood. He had shed enough of it himself, fought in wars that had torn Westeros apart, survived betrayals and heartbreak. And now, everything came down to a clash he could scarcely believe was real. Tomorrow, at dawn, he would face Sir Gregor Clegane. No, the mountain, within the very walls that had once seemed a fortress against the chaos of the world. The hush of the twilight seemed at odds with the turmoil in his mind. Of all the battles he had imagined in his life, never had he thought he would fight for the crown itself in single combat. And never had he thought Cersei would be gone, leaving behind a fractured realm and a dangerously large shadow cast by the monstrous knight who had once terrorized the entire kingdom on her behalf. He closed his eyes against the simmering city. For a moment he remembered himself as a boy, bright-haired, brash, too handsome for his own good, accompanying his father to tournaments and feasts. Then he recalled his apprenticeship with Sir Arthur Dayne, the greatest swordsman he had ever known, and how his heart had pounded with excitement at the chance to learn from the best. He remembered the glory of knighthood, the warmth of admiration in Cersei's eyes, the day he stood sentinel at the steps of the Great Sept, while Robert Baratheon took the throne from the mad king he had once sworn to protect. How times had changed. In the early years, he had worn his gold cloak with a touch of arrogance, believing himself invincible. Now standing here, he recognized how frail the threads of fate could be. One misstep could unravel everything. Tomorrow, he would test the measure of his skill and his faith in the face of Gregor Clegane's monstrous strength. It was said the mountain was stronger than ever. Certain rumors claimed dark magics had shaped him anew, that even death had not loosened its hold. That was some time ago, in the swirl of events surrounding the trial by combat for Tyrion, the secrets whispered of Qyburn's twisted experiments, and the siege that had followed. Though the mountain still walked and breathed, many said the creature behind that towering armor was something more than human. Jaime felt the weight of the phantom sword in his left hand. No, not his left. His right was gone, the once golden hand replaced by a new prosthetic. So many times he'd clutched a sword in reflex, only to remember that he would never wield a blade the same way again. He ran his fingers over the metal hand absent-mindedly, wondering again if this was folly. A one-handed man challenging the strongest knight in the realm for the right to seize power? Yet all around them forces conspired to drag Westeros deeper into chaos. The Iron Throne sat precariously empty. Tommen had died under haunting circumstances, poisoned, so it was said, or undone by grief. Myrcella had fallen long ago in Dorne. The old alliances were shattered. There was a sense among the lords that the realm needed stability. And if no strong claimant stood forth, any opportunist might grasp at the seat of dragons. When chaos reigned, men like Euron, Greyjoy, men like Littlefinger, men like the Mountain himself, might decide that brute strength was as good as a king's blood. Yet somehow, as improbable as it was, Jaime had found himself coaxed, and ultimately cornered, into pressing a claim. He was still a Lannister, after all, son of Tywin, the same Tywin who had orchestrated half the cunning machinations in the realm. Jaime bore that name, wore the fierce pride that came with it, and even if he had once been known as the Kingslayer, the realm knew him. He had been King's Guard. He had saved the city from Eris Wildfire. He had, in some eyes, done what was needed to end madness. And now, with no clear heir, some whispered that it was Jaime's destiny to wear the crown he had once guarded. They whispered in hallways and backrooms, betting on what might be if he emerged victorious. They compared him favorably to the Mountain, who had become little more than a silent, menacing embodiment of Cersei's cruelty. If the Mountain won, they said, it would be a reign of terror. But if Jaime won, perhaps a measure of stability could be found. He turned away from the window, heart thrumming with unspoken tension. He walked slowly through the solar, passing a table laden with maps, battle reports, and small carved figurines representing the lords and ladies who either supported him or stood neutral. Allies, or enemies waiting for a moment to strike. What good was forging alliances if tomorrow's fight ended in his swift death? What place was there for alliances once blood drenched the courtyard stone? He exhaled, remembering how the steel of the blade felt in his left hand, the calluses slowly building there. He had trained tirelessly for this with Bronn's help. Day in and day out, Bronn had hammered him until his muscles burned and his soul felt too weary to carry on. But he had carried on, because he could never forget all that he had lost. Cersei was gone now. Where, exactly, had been uncertain for a time, and rumors had claimed she'd fled or been spirited away. Some said she perished in the collapse of the Great Sept after wildfire consumed it, but Jaime had seen enough illusions to wait for certain truth. Regardless, he was left with guilt and complicated memories. But he also knew that if anyone could face Gregor Clegane, it was the man who refused to die, the man who had learned how to fight anew with his offhand, who had survived an avalanche of shame and regret. A quiet knock sounded at his door. Ser Bronn entered, mouth set in a grim line. He inclined his head to Jaime. "All's ready for tomorrow," Bronn said, cutting straight to the point. "The courtyard's being cleared. They're making sure no one can cheat, no crossbows hidden in the ramparts." He paused, lips twisting wryly. "Not that cheating would help against that great bloody beast." Jaime nodded. He could see the doubt in Bronn's eyes. "Good," he said softly, appreciating the sellsword's candor. If Bronn were a gambling man, and he was, Jaime wondered on which side he would place his bet. Perhaps even Bronn didn't know. "I'll see you at dawn then." Bronn lingered. "It's not too late to back out. We can find another way, someone else to champion your cause maybe. Could bribe half the city guard to break his knees while he's asleep." A faint smile ghosted across Jaime's mouth. "I'll not stoop to that, Bronn. I appreciate the thought, but I need to do this myself. The realm needs to see. If the one-handed lion can stand down the mountain in triumph, maybe that means something. Maybe it means we can still believe in knights and honor." He closed his eyes, a wave of fatigue washing through him. "I've worn that white cloak most of my life, Bronn. I've disgraced it. Maybe this is a chance to restore a fraction of what it should be." Bronn said nothing, but his eyes softened with unspoken understanding. He inclined his head again and left quietly. Jaime was alone, with only the torches and the hush of the evening to keep him company. Quietly, he removed his tunic, letting it drop to the floor. He paced his solar, trying to settle the trembling in his limbs. A flicker of memory tore through him, his father's stern face, the day he was told to leave Casterly Rock for King's Landing. Then Ned Stark's steady gaze as Jaime sat on the Iron Throne after killing Aerys. He could almost feel the sticky warmth of the Mad King's blood on his hands, that sensation that never quite left him. He had lived with the name Kingslayer, an epithet that once stung with shame. Now, ironically, he stood on the cusp of becoming a king in truth, if fortune allowed. How many times had he told himself it was all just a game? Now the game had turned to real. He prayed, for the first time in a long while, to the Seven for guidance. He prayed to the warrior for strength, to the smith for the skill to manage his sword, to the stranger for mercy if his end should come in the morning. And in the darkness of the night, Jaime Lannister knelt like a supplicant, shedding the last illusions of pride as he faced the inevitability of his mortal flesh against the monstrous Gregor Clegane. Eventually he rose, body tight with a tension that would not depart. He settled on his bed, eyes half-lidded, though sleep was slow to claim him. When the faint grey light of dawn crept through the window, Jaime was still awake, heart pounding a steady drumbeat in his chest. He dressed in silence, carefully pulling on leather breeches, a padded undercoat, then his gilded armor. He strapped his golden hand tight, though he felt no flesh or bone there, only a phantom ache. Bronn arrived to help him with the fastenings, his mouth set in that sardonic line. The sellsword was uncharacteristically quiet, no witty remarks to ease the tension. Once the final buckle was secured, Bronn glanced at Jaime. "You're a stubborn fool, you know." "I know," Jaime said softly. "Keep an eye on the proceedings. If something goes awry." "I'll do what I can," Bronn said. "But if you're planning on beating the mountain with just that shiny stump, well, I hope you've said your prayers." Jaime exhaled, trying to push aside the fear coiling in his belly. "Let's go," he said, voice tight with resolve. They made their way through the corridors of the Red Keep, the echoes of their footsteps turning ghostly in the near-silent halls. Already a crowd had gathered in the courtyard, though hush blanketed the space as though all of King's Landing held its breath in anticipation. Lords and knights stood at the edges, some perched on parapets, some whispering anxiously. The hush felt more ominous than any roar of a crowd. Jaime saw old faces, men he had once fought beside or against, each wearing different expressions. Some sympathetic, some expectant, many grim, and a few even eager for blood. At the far end of the courtyard, looming in the early morning gloom, stood Gregor Clegane. He was still clad in that thick, dark armor that seemed almost fused to his body. The mountain was near 7 feet tall, and though armor concealed his face, one could feel the menace radiating from him. Some said there was nothing behind that helmet but a living corpse. Others insisted Qyburn's black arts had melded the man to an undead creature. Whatever he was, Jaime felt a chill slide down his spine when the mountain's visor turned toward him. Jaime stepped forward, armor clinking in the hush. The space had been cleared for them, just a wide circle of crushed stone, ringed by watchers. He saw a cluster of priests from the Faith of the Seven, come to bear witness. He saw a few gold cloaks, awaiting orders, though no one dared speak. Standing near the makeshift dais was a tall figure with a neutral expression, Sir Balin Swan, the most senior knight currently willing to officiate. His stance was rigid with the gravity of his duty. Beside him stood a gilded chest containing a crown, a simple gold circlet etched with a lion motif on one side and a rose motif on the other, as though from some past alliance. Jaime hardly knew whose crown it was. All he knew was that the one who won the duel would be recognized as the rightful king, or so the agreement went among the power brokers who had hammered out the terms. "There are no further words to be said," Swan declared, voice echoing in the courtyard. "Let it be known, this is a trial of arms to determine the rightful claimant to the throne of the 7 kingdoms. Sir Jaime Lannister, you stand champion for your claim by blood and by right, son of Tywin Lannister, the last recognized regent and warden of the West. Sir Gregor Clegane stands champion for his own claim, by right of conquest and might. The gods will witness, and the realm will abide." Narendra saw. The watchers remained still. The wind tugged at Jaime's cloak. For a moment, he thought of the times he had been forced to kill men who claimed they did so for the good of the realm. He tightened his grip on the hilt of his sword, his left hand, unaccustomed but not entirely untrained. This blade was not Oathkeeper, which had gone to Brienne of Tarth, but another fine blade forged in Lannisport. Valyrian steel would have been preferable, but that was not an option. He told himself that skill still mattered. Even with one hand, he had refined his swordsmanship to a lethal edge. All that remained was to see if it was enough. He let the hush fall away, focusing his breathing. On the far side, Gregor Clegane lifted a monstrous 2-handed sword. The blade was nearly as large as some men, but he held it with casual ease. Jaime swallowed, heartbeat thrumming in his ears. Then Swan stepped back, raising an arm. "Combatants, begin." The courtyard exploded into a single clarion moment of decision. Jaime shifted forward, sword at the ready. Gregor advanced like a siege tower, each heavy footstep rattling the stones. They closed the distance in a heartbeat. Jaime's mind was alert to the mountain's every shift, every subtle move of shoulders and hips that telegraphed the blow to come. Gregor's first strike was a downward slash that came so swiftly, Jaime barely managed to parry. The shock of impact numbed his entire left arm. He staggered, trying to deflect the unstoppable power. He had faced many strong foes in his life, but Gregor Clegane was something else, something monstrous. For a brief instant, Jaime could almost see the mocking grin behind that helmet. The mountain twisted, sweeping sideways, and Jaime dove back, letting the tip of that enormous sword whistle mere inches from his breastplate. Dust plumed around Jaime's boots as he circled. He dared not stand toe-to-toe with Gregor. His best chance was to outmaneuver, to keep moving, to exploit any opening. But an opening in the mountain's defense was rarer than a crow's tooth. Gregor's plate was thick and cunningly wrought, covering him from head to toe. The lethal illusions of normal men were absent here. The mountain was all raw muscle and unstoppable momentum. Jaime tried a quick slash at the mountain's side, hoping to find a gap under the arm. The blow glanced harmlessly off the black steel. Gregor swung around with bone-crunching force, the clang of metal echoing across the courtyard. Jaime managed a hasty block, but the impact jarred him to the core. He felt the burn in his shoulder from parrying such monstrous strength. The watchers stood silent, as though collectively holding their breath, every eye fixed on the swirling conflict. The mountain pressed forward, each blow landing like a thunderclap. Jaime danced back, forced into a defensive posture. Already, his arm felt heavy, the strain of each parry building. He searched for any sign of Gregor's vulnerability, any slight tell in the body that might allow a swift thrust. But the mountain was methodical, unrelenting, and impossibly strong. Jaime risked a quick feint at the man's helm, then dropped low, trying to jam the blade behind the knee. Once again he struck only metal, and Gregor hammered him with a kick that knocked him sprawling onto the stone. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Jaime's breath whooshed out of his lungs. He scrambled, desperate to regain his feet before the mountain's sword descended, cleaving him in two. The blade hissed toward him. Jaime rolled to the side, the edge slamming into the ground, throwing sparks. Dust filled the air. Jaime came up stumbling, leaning heavily on his sword for balance. His heart pounded like a war drum, sweat trickling down his brow. He tasted blood on his lip from where he'd bitten it in the tumble. Gregor yanked the sword free, eyes behind the visor glinting with a cruel satisfaction. Then, wordlessly, the mountain surged again. Jaime managed to duck beneath another cleaving blow, and retreated, trying to catch a moment's respite. He circled, forcing the mountain to pivot. One advantage Jaime might have was speed and agility. The mountain's size was both strength and potential weakness. If he could wear him down, force him to move in circles, maybe fatigue would set in. But the mountain's new form, or whatever unholy transformation Qyburn had wrought, had shown little sign of weakness in the months leading to this confrontation. Jaime noted how Gregor's breathing was eerily controlled, showing none of the typical panting or roars he once displayed. The quiet, unstoppable presence was more unnerving than any battle cry. In the hush of the courtyard, Jaime seized on a minor opening. Gregor's pivot left a fraction of the gorget exposed. Jaime lunged, blade darting for the gap. Metal squealed against metal, and the tip scored a shallow line, but not enough to breach. Gregor retaliated, swinging in a brutal arc. Jaime managed to partially parry, but the force slammed his guard back into his face, and he felt the edge of his own gauntlet clip his jaw. Pain exploded, rattling his vision. He reeled backward, nearly dropping his sword. For a terrifying second, the world spun. He forced himself to remain upright, forced his eyes to refocus. The golden hand felt leaden at his side, useless. He tried to shift his stance, but everything ached. He heard Bron's voice somewhere behind the spectators, cursing or calling out encouragement. He couldn't tell. He caught glimpses of lords leaning forward, straining to see if the Kingslayer would fall. Across the ring, Gregor advanced with that patient, inexorable gait. Jaime spat blood, squared his shoulders, and prepared to meet him again. What chance did he truly have? The old Jaime Lannister, in his prime, with 2 good hands, might have bested Gregor in a duel of skill. Or at least he would have stood a fair chance. But that Jaime was gone, lost along with his right hand. In his place was a man who bore regret and the faint glimmer of a new kind of discipline. Over long months, he had retrained with Bronn. Painfully, he had unlearned old habits and formed new ones, guided by an unbending resolve. Perhaps that resolute will was worth more than the arrogance he once carried. He steadied his breathing, remembering the days spent in the practice yard, Bronn's scathing remarks, the humiliations endured. Remembering the times he had nearly collapsed from exhaustion, cursing his useless gold hand. Slowly, bit by bit, he had gotten faster. More precise. He had learned to read an opponent with new eyes. He had learned to rely on footwork and cunning. He had learned to exploit every fraction of advantage. Could that suffice against a monster? He stepped back in, a cautious thrust at Gregor's flank. Predictably, Gregor blocked it. Jaime twisted, using the recoil to slash across the visor. Steel screamed against steel. He didn't break the helm, but he forced Gregor to step back. For a heartbeat, the watchers murmured. Jaime pressed closer, steel flicking in quick arcs, each blow aimed at a seam or gap. For the first time, Gregor seemed forced into a defensive posture. Jaime glimpsed a spark of annoyance in that monstrous stance. They exchanged a flurry of blows, swords ringing, the sound reverberating off the high walls. Jaime's arm burned with the exertion, but he welcomed it. He had to keep the pressure on. When Gregor inevitably recovered and countered, the tide would shift again. Jaime's only hope was to weaken the mountain, to unbalance him. He made a daring feint low, then brought his sword up to the gap beneath Gregor's left pauldron. The blade slipped an inch into flesh. A spurt of something dark stained the metal. Blood, though it looked thick and sluggish. Gregor let out a guttural sound, half growl, half hiss. Fury radiated from him. He swung mightily, forcing Jaime back yet again. Jaime's sword arm felt numb, but he had scored a hit. Did that mean Gregor could bleed? The watchers seemed to sense the tension escalating. Some gasped, others cried out in excitement or horror. The hush shattered. Jaime heard the rush of blood in his own ears. The mountain advanced anew, lashing out with a powerful overhead strike. Jaime twisted aside. The mountain hammered him with a gauntleted fist. Pain shattered through Jaime's side as he crashed onto the stones. His sword skittered away, and he gasped, air driven from his lungs. Gregor loomed, raising that massive blade for the killing blow. Frantically, Jaime rolled, scrambled, found his sword hilt. He brought it up in a desperate block, just as Gregor's sword descended. The sheer force drove Jaime's blade down, nearly snapping it. Jaime felt the jolt up his arm and cried out, the golden hand scraping on stone. He thought his bones might give way, but he grit his teeth and shoved back with all he had. The swords locked, trembling with the tension of opposing strength. Gregor pressed downward, unstoppable as a landslide. Jaime's elbow buckled. His breath caught in his throat. This was it. He was pinned, the monstrous knight forcing the tip of the blade inexorably closer to Jaime's face. Time seemed to slow. The watchers' voices blurred into a dull roar. Jaime's mind flickered through memories of Cersei, of Tyrion, of the vow he'd once made to be a true knight. He had always thought himself special, but now he was a beaten man at the mercy of the realm's greatest brute. In that agonizing heartbeat, he thought, so this is how it ends. A single stroke, and my skull will be cleaved. The realm will remain in chaos or fall under the mountain's tyranny. But something within Jaime refused to yield. He growled, summoning every last reserve of will. Twisting his hips, he angled the locked blades to the side. Gregor's sword skidded forward, biting into Jaime's pauldron instead of his face. Metal screeched. Jaime braced his legs, and in a sudden burst, he kicked upward with his good foot, connecting with the inside of Gregor's knee. The big knight swayed, momentarily off balance. Jaime seized that instant. He released one hand from the hilt, his golden hand, and snatched a hidden dagger from his belt with the left. With a swift, desperate motion, he drove the dagger at the weak spot in Gregor's gorget. The blade struck home. A burst of that same thick, dark fluid gushed out. Gregor arched backward, a half-choking sound echoing behind the visor. Jaime twisted the dagger for good measure and wrenched it free, stumbling away from beneath the mountain's looming bulk. Gregor staggered, still upright, still a colossus. Jaime could barely stand, chest heaving. He clutched his sword with one hand, dagger in the other, waiting to see if the monstrous knight would fall. The watchers fell silent again. Gregor put a hand to his neck, where the dark fluid seeped. His gaze locked on Jaime. For a moment, Jaime thought the mountain might push through the pain and resume the onslaught. But Gregor's movements were slow, almost mechanical. His knees buckled. Like a falling statue, he crashed to the courtyard stones, the the weight of his massive armor rattling as he collapsed onto his side. Jaime let out a shaky exhale, unsure if the fight was truly over. He hovered at the edge of caution, sword raised. Another few seconds passed. Gregor did not rise, though he moved slightly, almost as if trying to push himself up. Jaime could hear his own heartbeat slamming in his ears, each breath ragged. Then, finally, the mountain's movement stilled. A hush as profound as the void gripped the courtyard. Jaime felt all the strength leak from his limbs at once. He slumped, nearly toppling to his knees, sword clattering from his grip. His entire body throbbed with pain, bruises forming under his armor, perhaps a cracked rib or two. But he was alive. He stared at the mountain's motionless form, blood pounding with disbelief. Somehow, unbelievably, he had done it. A stunned quiet pervaded the yard. The watchers seemed frozen. Then someone let out a roar of triumph, and others joined in with cheers, with stunned exclamations. Some cried out in horror, no doubt supporters of the mountain. Many simply stared, uncertain of what they had witnessed. It was as if no one had truly believed Jaime could win, including Jaime himself. Sir Balançoine stepped forward, eyes wide, and took in the sight of the fallen Gregor Clegane. He approached Jaime, kneeling beside him. "The gods have spoken," Swan said in a slightly tremulous voice, and for once in his life, Jaime thought he heard genuine awe in someone's words regarding him. "You have triumphed, Sir Jaime. By the terms set forth, you are the victor, and the rightful king." Jaime blinked. The rightful king. The phrase felt unreal. He tried to speak, but his throat was too raw. He nodded, wanting to keep some semblance of composure. A crowd began to move forward, some bold enough to approach him, though the gold cloaks held them at bay for the moment. He saw banners of House Lannister among them, men of the West who had placed their hopes on him. He saw a swirl of conflicting expressions: fear, relief, uncertainty. Above it all, the sun had fully risen, bathing the courtyard in a golden glow. He thought fleetingly of his father. No, Tywin would have orchestrated this so carefully, left nothing to chance. Tywin would likely have found 1,000 ways to avoid such a risk. But here Jaime stood, forging his own path in a break from the father who had dominated his life. He was too exhausted to stand without aid. Bronn shoved his way through the onlookers, half holding Jaime upright with a supportive arm. "You bloody idiot," Bronn muttered, though there was relief in his eyes. "I can't believe you did it. I can't believe it worked." Jaime coughed, taste of copper on his tongue. "Neither can I." Swan gestured to the chest. A pair of retainers brought it forth, opening the lid to reveal the golden circlet. Jaime tried not to let his disbelief show. This was the next step, apparently. Coronation by rite of combat. It was an echo of an older tradition, perhaps twisted for the current chaos. Before Jaime could protest or gather his thoughts, Swan reached in and lifted the circlet. A hush fell again, though excited murmurs rippled around the edges. Jaime felt the press of eyes on him, the weight of expectations as real as the weight of the armor on his bruised body. "We witness this day the trial of combat," Swan intoned, raising the crown. "Jaime of House Lannister emerges victorious. By the laws and customs agreed upon by the great houses in this time of tumult, we name him King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, Protector of the Realm." Nas. Jaime felt his heart twist. Part of him wanted to say no. Part of him wanted to say that this was madness, that a Kingslayer should never be king, that everything about this was flawed. But the realm was on the brink. Perhaps if he did not claim this, a worse man would. Perhaps if he faltered, the chaos would only deepen. He closed his eyes, letting the swirl of voices and the hush fill him. Then slowly he bowed his head, feeling the cool metal of the crown settle onto his golden hair. A roar arose from the crowd, some cheering, some uncertain, but it was enough to break the hush. The new king, Jaime, once of the Kingsguard, found himself swarmed by men, pledging fealty, by lords, pressing forward to express their loyalty, or to secure their positions. Jaime felt dazed, nearly drowned in the torrent of attention. He glimpsed the mountain's body being approached by some of Qyburn's old acolytes, uncertain what they might do. But for now, the deed was done, and the creature seemed well and truly beaten. Jaime let Bronn help him out of the courtyard, half in a haze. He clutched the crown in one hand, sword dragging in the other. The sunlight felt too bright, the press of bodies too clamoring. He wanted quiet, wanted to escape. Yet the realm's burdens pressed in. A part of him whispered that this was but the beginning. Slaying the mountain had been the first step, but keeping the realm united would be a greater trial by far. Would the North accept him? Would Dorne? The Vale? The Iron Islands? How would the remnants of the faith respond to a man once known as the Kingslayer wearing the crown? Even if they had recognized the trial by combat as legitimate, old grudges lingered. The politicking would only intensify. Up in his solar, Jaime slumped onto a chair, wincing. Bronn removed his battered armor piece by piece, revealing the angry bruises and the shallow cuts. Jaime's body ached with more intensity than he had felt in years. "I'll send for the maester," Bronn said, surprisingly gentle. "Let him see to those wounds. Then you'll have to appear before the lords, I suppose. They'll want a formal ceremony." "No, not us, say." Jaime nodded numbly, letting his gaze rest on the crown he had set on the table. "I had never wanted this," he muttered, voice ragged. "I served kings. I failed one, then I served another. I never thought I'd wear the damn thing myself." Bronn's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Life's full of surprises, Your Grace." Jaime closed his eyes, exhaling a shaky breath. He recalled the vow he had once made to himself, to become a better man, to live up to the ideals he had once scorned. Now, as king, could he do that? Or would the temptations of power, the labyrinth of court intrigue, drag him down the same dark roads as the mad kings before him? He felt the weight of the crown even from afar, as though it were forged of iron rather than gold. He knew with an ache in his chest that the hardest battles still lay before him. But for now, he had done what seemed impossible. He had bested the mountain. If he could do that, perhaps there was still hope to shape a better fate for Westeros. He fell into an exhausted slumber after the maester's ministrations. When he awoke, the midday sun streamed through the windows, and the pain in his side flared anew. But beyond the ache, he felt a solemn determination building in him. He forced himself up, ignoring the stiffness. A new day had begun, with new duties. He rang for attendants to prepare a formal audience. The lords and ladies who had gathered in King's Landing would expect their new king to address them. The city, battered by wars, yearned for a sign that stability might return. An hour later, Jaime found himself on the Iron Throne. It was the first time he had sat upon it since that fateful day he slew Aerys. The memories came back unbidden, the Mad King's blood pooling at the base of the steps, the heat of wildfire in the air. Now, the throne's twisted blades pressed against his back. The hall was not as crowded as it had been in the old days, but enough lords stood to fill the echoing space with murmurs and shifting feet. The great houses were no longer the same. Some were extinguished, others broken, and new leaders had arisen. Yet, they gathered here, or sent representatives. The hush settled as Jaime sat, wearing the crown, the white of a king's guard cloak around his shoulders. On his left side, his gold hand glimmered in the torchlight. On his right, his left hand rested on the pommel of his sword, as though reluctant to let it go. He scanned their faces, reading them as best he could. The Westerlands were well represented naturally. The Reach had some presence, though it was still reeling from its own succession struggles. The Stormlands were uncertain. The Baratheon line had scattered to the winds. The Vale's envoy stood stiff and polite. From the north, only a few minor lords had come, eyeing him warily. The Riverlands, devastated by endless war, had sent a handful of bannermen, uncertain to whom they owed fealty now. Dorne's seat was empty. So many wounds inflicted by the last years of strife. The realm was a patchwork of resentments and mistrust. He inhaled, searching for the words that might begin to unite them. Who was he to wear the crown? A man with a tarnished name. But perhaps that was precisely why he understood the cost of war and betrayal. He had done terrible things, but so had the realm. Maybe they could find redemption together. His voice carried, steady, despite his fatigue. "Lords and ladies of Westeros, I stand before you as king not by birthright alone, but by the trial of combat you witnessed. In these years past, we have been torn apart by war, by ambition, by grief. The realm has bled enough. My vow, before all of you, is to seek a peace that can hold, to bring justice where I can, and to guard the realm from those who would destroy it." A murmur swept through the hall. Jaime continued, knowing this was only a beginning. "I will not pretend that I stand without sin. I will not claim a right to rule because I am blameless. But I claim it because the realm needs a unifying hand, and the gods have seen fit to grant me victory. If you will bend the knee, we shall move forward together. If not, I will strive to hear your grievances, to mend what has been broken." "Nah." An older lord from the Westerland stepped forward first, kneeling, pressing a hand to his breast. "We pledge ourselves, your grace. House Kenning stands with the king." Another from the Crown Lands followed suit. "House Rosby pledges loyalty." One by one, lords knelt, some with genuine reverence, others in a more reserved manner. The Vale's envoy inclined his head, but Jaime sensed caution in his eyes. The North's envoy said nothing, simply watched, lips pressed tight. That was a battle for another day. The great hall filled with the shuffle of bending knees, a reluctant chorus of fealty. Jaime felt the swirl of conflicting emotions. He was no fool. Many of these men and women might scheme behind his back, but for now, they recognized him as king. At length, the formalities ended, and Jaime dismissed the lords with assurances that he would hold council in the days to come to address the realm's many wounds. As the hall emptied, he remained on the Iron Throne, letting the gravity of the moment wash over him. He sensed a presence at his side and turned to see Bronn, who gave him a mocking half-bow. "Quite the sight," Bronn said. "You, up there, a crown on your pretty head. Almost can't believe it, almost." Jaime's lips twitched. "I can barely believe it myself. Do you regret not slitting my throat years ago and taking my gold?" Bronn chuckled. "Plenty of gold to be had now if you're handing out favors, but I suppose I'll stick around, see if you can make this kingdom business work." Jaime nodded, mind drifting to the tasks ahead. "I need a hand of the king, someone with a level head for politics. Any suggestions?" Bronn raised a brow. "You want me for that job? I know how to kill a man and take his coin, not how to juggle lords." A wry smile curved Jaime's mouth. "No, but I trust you to keep me alive long enough to find someone who can do the juggling." He paused, letting weariness seep in. "I wonder what Tyrion would say if he could see me now. He'd probably laugh himself sick." Jaime sighed. He missed Tyrion, though the paths they'd taken diverged sharply. He had no idea if Tyrion was even still alive, though rumors placed him across the narrow sea for a time. Would he return if Jaime was on the throne? The thought brought a pang of longing. Tyrion was cunning and wry. He might make a capable hand if old wounds could be forgiven. But that was just one possibility. The realm had many more immediate concerns: food shortages, rebellious lords, the shattered infrastructure left by war. It would take more than a crown knight to heal those wounds. Jaime felt the challenge loom, larger in some ways than Gregor Clegane. He left the throne then, ignoring the flare of pain in his ribs. He ventured to a private balcony overlooking the city. King's Landing stretched before him, the harbor glinting in the midday sun. Even from here, he could sense the city's restlessness. The small folk had endured famine, disease, riots. They would want tangible proof that a new reign meant better days. Could he deliver? He was no sorcerer, no cunning Machiavellian. He was a soldier who had learned to doubt war. But perhaps that was enough to start with, knowing that the realm needed peace more than conquest. He caught the faint smell of smoke on the breeze. There were always fires in King's Landing, a city too vast and crowded for comfort. He swallowed a surge of old guilt, remembering how close Aerys had come to burning it all, how Jaime had chosen to kill the king rather than watch thousands die. And now he was the king? Would he have to risk that same choice? The responsibility weighed on him like an anvil. But he was determined not to be Aerys, not to be Joffrey, not to be a tyrant like so many who had come before. If there was any redemption to be found, Maybe it lay in using the crown to preserve life, rather than spill more blood. In the days that followed, Jaime took his first steps as ruler. He convened a small council, painfully aware that most of the seats were vacant. He offered the position of Master of Whispers to a cunning minor lord who had proven his loyalty in the past. Lord Veerwell from the Westerlands, skilled in intelligence gathering. For Master of Laws, he turned to an older knight from the Reach, Sir Paxter Mullendor, who had once served Mace Tyrell and was known for a sense of justice. He left the role of Master of Coin vacant for now, lacking a suitable candidate, and declared that he would interview several merchants and bankers with ties to Bravos. Master of Ships was similarly unfilled. The Greyjoy threat lingered, and Jaime knew that controlling the seas was essential. As for the post of Hand, Jaime delayed, hoping to find someone of unimpeachable skill and at least some measure of loyalty or neutrality. Perhaps Sir Balon Swan or someone else known for fairness. Still, these were only seeds. Much of the realm remained outside his grasp. Messengers galloped out in all directions, bearing news of Jaime's ascension and invitations, or summons, depending on perspective. For the lords to come swear fealty, the response would be telling. If half the realm refused, war might reignite. Jaime often found himself in the training yard after his council sessions, ignoring the protests of the maester about his injuries. He needed the physical exertion, needed to keep practicing with his left hand. The yard, at least, was a place of honesty. Steel was steel. Muscle was muscle. No lies there. The affairs of state could swirl with half-truths, alliances shifting like quicksand. Here he could lose himself in the ring of swords. Bronn sparred with him, though carefully, aware of Jaime's injuries. Each day, Jaime felt the bruises fade and his stamina return. His skill, never as fluid as his old self, settled into a new rhythm, methodical, relentless, precise. After an hour's training, he would find himself gasping for breath, sweat-soaked but strangely clear in mind. Once, he caught a glimpse of the old confidence in his reflection, that flicker of the man who had once been described as the finest swordsman in the realm. But the memories of the mountain's unstoppable might tempered any pride. That victory had been as much luck as skill, and the determined cunning to exploit a tiny gap in Gregor's armor. As the weeks passed, the news of Jaime's coronation spread, and envoys began to trickle in. Some houses pledged support, swayed by the Lannister gold that might flow again from Casterly Rock. Others hesitated, waiting to see if the new king would last, or if a new pretender would rise. Yet slowly, a fragile tapestry emerged, a semblance of unity. Jaime learned to speak in measured tones at council sessions, listening more than he talked, gleaning insights from the fractious lords. He discovered he possessed a certain calm authority, surprising himself. Perhaps the trauma he had endured, the humiliations and revelations, had carved away the brash arrogance. Now he projected a quieter confidence. The lords were not entirely certain what to make of it, but some found it reassuring. In the north, rumors said a new leader had emerged, someone claiming ties to the old Stark line. Jaime wondered if the North would rise again in rebellion, or if they would see reason. He penned personal letters, an olive branch of sorts. He offered to confirm the North's rights and liberties if they remained loyal to the crown. No immediate reply came, but that was the North's way, slow and deliberate. Dawn was equally remote, still nursing the wounds from Oberyn Martell's death and the chaos that followed. Jaime sent envoys promising justice and recognition of Dornish sovereignty in certain matters, but he did not know if the Martells, or whoever ruled now, would respond favorably. Despite these uncertainties, King's Landing itself began to stabilize. Jaime decreed that bread prices be regulated, that the gold cloaks crack down on robberies and extortion. He ordered the city watch reformed with men loyal to the throne, men who would not abuse their power. Slint was long gone, and that was for the best. He oversaw repairs to the city walls damaged by various sieges, though the coffers were not as full as they once were. The city's small folk gradually dared to hope that normal life might resume. Word spread that the king was a man who had faced down the mountain and survived, which lent him a certain aura of respect. Some still recalled him as the Kingslayer, but others saw a man who had paid dearly for past sins. One afternoon, A hush fell over the Red Keep's courtyard as a group of riders arrived. They carried banners half torn, but Jaime recognized them, a golden rose on green, the sigil of House Tyrell. The Tyrells had been among the mightiest houses in the realm, but the wars had left the family drastically diminished. The only survivor of Mace Tyrell's direct line was a distant cousin named Leo Tyrell, rumored to be a cautious, scholarly man. The retinue, led by Sir Randall Fossaway, approached the throne room. Jaime summoned them at once, curious what tidings they bore. In the great hall, the Tyrell envoys bowed. Their spokesman, Sir Randall, cleared his throat. "Your Grace, we bring greetings from Highgarden. Lord Leo Tyrell regrets he could not come in person but sends word of his loyalty. He wishes to discuss the re-establishment of trade routes through the Reach and a formal alliance." Jaime studied them, noting their anxious expressions. "Lord Tyrell's loyalty is noted. The realm's stability depends on the bounty of the Reach. We will be pleased to negotiate an agreement that benefits both the Crown and Highgarden. Is there more?" "No one." Sir Randall hesitated, then ventured. "There have been riders on the Mander, mercenaries, some claim, possibly remnants of the Ironborn or Sellsword companies that never disbanded. Highgarden requests the king's assistance in driving them off." "Another problem." Jaime nodded gravely. "We will address this. I can dispatch a royal commander to aid in clearing the Mander. The king's peace must hold throughout Westeros." This seemed to relieve them. Jaime exchanged a few more pleasantries, setting a schedule for official talks. After they left, he sank back on the Iron Throne, fatigue tugging at him. Bronn, standing off to the side, approached. "More troubles. You'll be chasing bandits from now till the end of your reign, you know." Jaime sighed. "If that's what it takes to keep the realm together, so be it. We have to start somewhere." He made good on that promise, dispatching troops to Highgarden under a reliable commander, Sir Adam Marbrand, once a trusted retainer of the Lannisters. Meanwhile, Jaime continued to strengthen the city watch, ensure that the Crown's authority extended throughout the Crown lands, and quell any local lords who chafed under the new rule. To his mild surprise, many small folk seemed relieved to have a monarch who did not appear cruel or capricious. As for the lords, they accepted that a strong king was better than an endless cycle of claimants. Still, Jaime's nights remained restless. He dreamt of the mountain looming over him, or of the Mad King howling about wildfire. He dreamt of Cersei, her face twisted with accusations he could not answer. Yet each morning, he rose to don the mantle of kingship, forging alliances and making judgments. Slowly, word arrived that some northern lords had at least responded, acknowledging his letters. They did not commit to bending the knee yet, but they expressed willingness to negotiate. That was more than Jaime had expected. He appointed a diplomatic envoy, led by Sir Balon Swan, ironically enough, and sent them north with gifts of grain and reassurance of mutual benefit. The city itself began to take on a different atmosphere. By royal decree, the mountain's remains were burned outside the city walls. Qyburn's acolytes had tried to claim the body, but Jaime refused. He wanted no more necromancy, no more monstrosities. As the pyre blazed, Jaime watched from the ramparts, a somber figure in black and gold. It was a final exorcism of one of the many horrors that had plagued King's Landing. In the following weeks, more envoys arrived. Some were remnants of the Tully or Frey families, seeking recognition or favor. The fractious politics of the Riverlands, still wounded from the Red Wedding and subsequent conflicts, offered a maze of alliances. Jaime navigated it cautiously, aiming to restore some measure of order. He set about reorganizing the wards and ensuring that law courts could function again. Small acts, but they seeded hope. He felt the crown settle more familiarly on his head, though he never wore it for long, only in official appearances. At other times, he preferred a simple circlet or nothing at all, not wanting the constant reminder of metal pressing into his scalp. Amid these tasks, Jaime found a measure of purpose. He would never be the naive knight he once pretended to be, but he had found a cause larger than himself, holding the kingdom together against ruin. He seldom thought of personal ambition anymore. He thought instead of the battered small folk, the orphan children, the starving peasants. He thought of the once proud castles lying in ruin, The fields burned, the families torn apart. If he could restore even a fraction of stability, perhaps that would be worth the price of wearing a crown he never desired. Yet, not all news was encouraging. Whispers reached him of Euron Greyjoy still prowling the seas, causing havoc. Of sellsword companies forming in Essos, perhaps with designs on Westeros. And overshadowing it all was the question of winter. Some said the worst snows in a century were descending in the north, that supplies would soon run short. Jaime had no illusions. His precarious rule would be tested by famine, by rebellious lords, by foreign threats. A single duel, even one as dramatic as his victory over the mountain, did not guarantee lasting peace. One evening, he found himself alone in the godswood of the Red Keep, if one could call it that, a small cluster of weirwoods, a quiet place rarely visited. He sat on a bench under the pale bark of a heart tree, though its face was scarcely carved, a faint outline from centuries past. He did not pray often, but tonight he felt the need for reflection. The air was crisp, with a hint of oncoming chill. He looked up at the branches, recalling old stories of the North's faith. The godswood offered a hush that soothed his weary mind. For a long while he simply breathed, letting the tension ease. The voice that interrupted his solitude was quiet, yet startling. "Your Grace." It was Brienne of Tarth, appearing from the shadows in a cloak of deep blue. She had arrived a few days prior, bearing news of her travels and seeking an audience. Jaime had welcomed her, though their conversation had been brief. Now, she stood with the awkward stiffness of someone uncertain if she should speak. Jaime rose, ignoring the protest of bruised ribs. "Brienne, I didn't know you were still in the city." She inclined her head. "I was about to depart, but I wish to speak with you first." Her voice was guarded, as though she weighed every word. "I heard tales of your duel with the mountain. Rumors say you slew him in single combat." He smiled wryly. "The rumors are true, with a little luck and a well-placed dagger." She stepped closer, her expression a mix of respect and concern. "You risked your life. Was it truly necessary?" "No. Jaime shrugged, feeling the phantom ache of that fight. "The realm needed a symbol, and I needed to prove something to myself." He paused, gazing at her. "You look well, Brienne. Still carrying Oathkeeper, I see." She nodded, resting a hand on the Valyrian steel at her hip. "Your gift has served me well. I've kept your oath, as best I can, searching for Sansa Stark, helping her find safety." Jaime's heartbeat quickened. "And did you succeed? Is she?" Brienne glanced away. "I cannot speak of her whereabouts, but she lives, Your Grace." A wave of relief washed through him. Sansa Stark was a piece in this game, but more than that, she was a young woman who had suffered enough. "I'm glad," he said softly. "Tell her, if the day comes when she must make her voice heard, she will be welcome here. I would hear her counsel." Brienne studied him with those clear blue eyes, as though evaluating whether he was sincere. Finally, she inclined her head. "I'll relay your words if she's willing to listen, but you must know the North still bears wounds. The memory of the Lannisters' deeds under your father's rule is not easily forgotten." "I know," Jaime admitted. "Perhaps in time, if I can show them I'm not Tywin, not Joffrey, they'll consider peace." Brienne nodded, an approval lurking at the corners of her mouth. "I believe in second chances, though I've rarely seen them given freely." He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "What of you? Where will you go now?" She straightened. "I'll continue my search for a certain missing soul. There are still those who claim Arya Stark is out there." She hesitated, then added, "And I'll do what I can to keep the peace. If I return, and you are still on that throne, well, I hope the realm is better off than when I left." Jaime offered a faint smile. "I hope so too." He felt an odd swirl of emotions in Brienne's presence. Gratitude, regret, respect. The memory of how she'd once called him out for his lack of honor resonated still. Now she nodded once more and withdrew, leaving him in the quiet of the godswood. With her departure, Jaime gazed up at the heart tree again. The face carved into the bark seemed to stare silently, as though judging. He wondered if the old gods, or the new, saw anything redeemable in him. But that was an old question. For now, he had a realm to rule. Time marched on. Messengers returned with varying reports of success or failure. The Riverlands seemed willing to accept Jaime's new reign, especially if he curbed the raids by outlaws that plagued them. The Vale remained cool, but not hostile. The North still withheld full allegiance, but polite correspondence continued. Dorne stayed aloof, ignoring his overtures. But trade resumed with the free cities, slowly refilling the royal treasury. Famine was staved off in King's Landing by rationing and by shipments from the Reach. Little by little, the city breathed easier. Jaime conducted official audiences, settled disputes, and slowly replaced the more corrupt officials. He insisted on personal oversight of the gold cloaks. The memory of Joffrey's reign, of the abuses in the streets, was still fresh in his mind. Under the watchful gaze of the king, the guards stepped more carefully. Fewer outrages were reported. The small folk began to venture out with less fear. Though tensions remained, there was a sense that maybe, just maybe, normalcy might return. Yet, as winter crept southward, the real test loomed. If the snows reached the Crownlands, if food ran short again, discontent could flare into rebellion. Jaime pressed the Lords of the Reach to send more grain, forging trade agreements with Braavos to secure supplies. He offered tax incentives to any lord who helped feed the capital. Some responded eagerly, swelling their coffers in the process. Others grumbled, uncertain. Jaime persevered, applying the best Lannister cunning he possessed to keep the realm afloat. Months after he had slain the Mountain, Jaime found himself staring at a map of Westeros spread across a long table in the council chamber. Colored pins indicated alliances, shipments, potential threats. He traced a finger from the north to the Riverlands, to King's Landing, to Dorne, assessing the realm's fragile unity. The crown was heavy on his head, metaphorically if not physically. Behind him, a few council members debated a new proposition, a building project to repair roads linking the Crownlands to the Reach. Jaime half listened. His thoughts drifted back to that courtyard, the roar of the crowd, the unstoppable force of Gregor Clegane's blade. He remembered the cold clarity he'd felt in that moment, the defiance that had pushed him to drive the dagger home. Now, that same defiance burned in him, fueling the daily grind of governance. He would not let the realm fall into darkness again. Perhaps that was the sum of his destiny, from Kingslayer to king, from a man who took a life in betrayal to one who must preserve countless lives in responsibility. He glanced over his shoulder at Bronn, who lounged nearby, bored with the council's talk of roads. "Well, Master of War," Jaime asked, half-joking, "any bright strategies for the bandits on the Gold Road?" Bronn smirked. "A few squads of the Gold Cloaks might do, with a decent commander, or a few sellswords who know how to fight in the hills." Jaime nodded. "Draft the order. We can't have travelers ambushed. Trade must flow." He turned back to the map, pressing his hand down on the pin marking Lannisport. That port would be key to moving goods to King's Landing if the storm-racked seas allowed it. The entire realm felt like a precarious puzzle, each piece needing delicate handling. But for all the burdens, there were small victories. Each time he learned of a region returning to some measure of peace, each time a new alliance was forged, each time the city's small folk found cause to celebrate a wedding or a festival without fear, Jaime felt a spark of satisfaction. This was the slow, patient work of healing. He owed the realm at least that much. So many had died in wars that had begun, in part, by the Lannisters' ambitions. Another voice broke through his thoughts. Lord Verwell, the Master of Whispers. He bowed slightly and approached the table. "Your Grace, a raven from the north. It seems the king in the north, Stark or otherwise, may accept your invitation to parley in Moat Cailin." Jaime's attention sharpened. They call themselves King in the North? That was potentially alarming, but perhaps the formal style was just a relic of the war. "Very well, we will see if we can negotiate a peace. Send Sir Balon to represent me, with full authority to offer them autonomy in local matters, so long as they acknowledge the crown's overlordship." Verwell dipped his head. "It shall be done." He left the chamber swiftly, to coordinate the official response. Jaime gazed down at the map once more, a swirl of thoughts in his head. If an accord with the North could be reached, that would be a major breakthrough. one step at a time, forging a realm out of the ashes. He turned to his council, including Paxter Mullendore, who was engaged in a quiet debate with the others about the building project. Jaime cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, we proceed with the roads. Also, I want an updated report on the harvest yields in the Reach. We'll need to distribute seeds and supplies for spring planting if the snows retreat. Let's also prepare a census of the Crown lands to better understand how many mouths we must feed." The council nodded. They made their notes, and the conversation resumed with a more constructive tone. It was not glamorous work, no grand feasts or triumphs, but it was the labor of kingship, a burden Jaime accepted with a stoic resolve. Outside the Red Keep, life continued. The city's markets bustled. The passing months had smoothed some edges of memory about the horrors that had befallen King's Landing. People adapted, focusing on their daily bread and the possibility of prosperity under a new regime. Jaime made sure the rumor spread. The king had once been a fearless knight, a man who had humbled the mountain himself, and now he strove to protect them from new terrors. Did they believe it? Perhaps. People clung to hopeful tales. Though winter had not fully descended on the Crownlands, chills came more often. Some nights, the temperature plummeted, fires roaring in the hearths. Jaime had the city watch distribute blankets and warm clothing to the poorest districts, an act of compassion or strategy. Let the small folk see that the crown cared enough to keep them alive. The memory of the bread riots under Joffrey lingered. Jaime would not repeat that mistake. Still, he was not blind to the whispers of discontent. Some lords muttered that he was spending too much coin on the small folk, or that he was ignoring the rightful prerogatives of the nobility. Others thought him weak, a crippled swordsman who might not defend the realm against a true invasion. He knew his hold on power was not absolute. Yet he pressed forward, determined not to rule by fear alone. The echoes of Gregor Clegane's terrifying presence were enough for him to realize that fear, while effective, could lead to monstrous acts. The nightmares persisted. Sometimes he woke in a cold sweat, seeing fire in every corridor, hearing the Mad King's voice shrieking, "Burn them all!" He would lie awake, clenching his golden hand into a fist, reminding himself that he had chosen a different path. On one such night, he rose and stood at the window, looking out at the faint lights of the city. The crown lay on a table behind him. He had worn it at a council meeting earlier and cast it aside when the day's work was done. Now he felt the phantom weight of it on his brow. He realized that whether he physically wore it or not, the crown would always weigh on him. In the glass reflection, he caught a glimpse of himself. He studied the lines on his face, the tired eyes, the truncated right wrist that ended in a golden replica. The man who stared back was not the golden boy who had once held all of Westeros in contempt. This man bore scars, physical and otherwise, and a sense of humility. Jaime did not know if he would be a good king. He only knew he would try, to the limit of his strength. He owed that to the realm, and perhaps to himself. The next day, a raven arrived from Braavos with a proposal for a sizable loan to the crown, at favorable terms if certain trade concessions were made. Jaime weighed the offer carefully, recalling the Iron Bank's reputation for unwavering collections. But if the coin could repair roads, feed the hungry, and stabilize the realm, it might be worth the risk. He put the matter before the council, spurring a lively debate. Some favored it, others fretted about the crown's debt. Jaime listened to each side, then decided. "We accept, under the condition that interest rates are capped and we repay within 5 years. Let's not become thralls to foreign bankers." A measured approach. That evening, he penned letters to the major houses, urging them to send representatives for a spring council in King's Landing, a chance to finalize alliances and discuss the realm's future. He knew it was an uncertain gamble, but if it succeeded, Westeros might at last find a path to unity. Sealing the parchment with the royal seal, his father's lion combined with a crown motif, he felt a flicker of pride. Tywin would have demanded absolute submission. Jaime was inviting compromise. Perhaps that alone was progress. The next weeks brought more logistical challenges. Ships from the Iron Islands raided the coasts occasionally, forcing Jaime to divert resources to bolster coastal defenses. He pressed for negotiations, but no word came from Pike. The Greyjoys remained elusive. In the Stormlands, pockets of banditry required a firm hand, so Jaime sent Lord Tarley, who had survived the wars and retained formidable leadership, at the head of a royal legion. The Vale demanded a reassurance that the king would not meddle in their internal succession disputes, and Jaime pledged as much, seeking only their fealty and the payment of taxes. Each step required delicate maneuvers, but day by day, a tapestry of tenuous peace spread across the realm. Eventually, the first snows dusted the Crownlands. King's Landing did not see the deep drifts that paralyzed the north, but the frosty mornings lent a sense of urgency to final harvests and distribution of stores. Jaime ordered the distribution of grain to the city's poor. He heard rumors that certain lords were hoarding supplies, so he dispatched royal inspectors, risking their resentment. The reports that returned suggested corruption in some corners, but less than one might expect in such turbulent times. The presence of a strong monarchy, ironically led by a once despised Kingslayer, was beginning to quell old patterns of lawlessness. The sword had become a scepter of sorts. In these months, Jaime sometimes heard jokes from the small folk that the king was truly a lion. Fierce, missing a paw, but still prowling. Others called him the one-handed king. Some said it derisively, others with grudging admiration. He learned to shrug off such remarks, focusing on his duties. He also found a measure of calm in his personal quarters at night, reading old histories or quietly reflecting. He no longer felt the same restlessness that once drove him to chase glories in tournaments or war. He had discovered a deeper purpose in seeing the realm healed. As winter deepened, ravens brought tidings from the north, a partial acceptance of terms. They would send an envoy in the spring to finalize a pact. Jaime felt a surge of cautious relief. That was perhaps the greatest threat. If the north refused to bend the knee, the realm could fracture anew. But for now, they were willing to talk. He also received a note from Dorne, a brief, formal letter acknowledging his rule, but offering no commitments. Still, it was a crack in the door. Amid these developments, the lords of Westeros gradually converged on King's Landing for the Spring Council. The roads were fraught with ice in places, but enough arrived to fill the city with bustling activity. Inns overflowed, the taverns rang with laughter and debate, old feuds flickered. Jaime prepared for a grand assembly, determined to present a vision for peace. The Targaryen dragons were a distant memory, the Baratheons had lost their line, the Tyrells were much reduced, and the Martells were sullen. But House Lannister now held the throne, offering gold and security in exchange for fealty. Could that be enough to knit the fractures? When the day of the council arrived, Jaime rode through the streets in formal procession. He wore gilded armor polished to a mirror sheen, his cloak a deep crimson lined with ermine, the crown upon his head. The small folk gathered to watch, some cheering, some only curious. He saw children stare wide-eyed at the spectacle. He wondered how many remembered the horrors of the past wars or Cersei's cruelty. The city, for all its scars, still had heart. He felt an odd wave of protectiveness for these people, wanting to spare them further pain. At the Red Keep, in a specially prepared hall, lords from across Westeros assembled. Jaime entered to a muted fanfare. He saw the banners of the Vale, the Riverlands, the Stormlands, the Westerlands, the Reach, a scattering from the north, a few from the Crownlands, and even a pair from Dorne. Representatives, not necessarily the paramount lords, but those who had come to treat with the new king. Jaime took his seat at the head of a great table, removing his crown to rest it before him as a symbol of shared counsel. Bronn stood to one side, along with the gold cloaks. The atmosphere was thick with tension. He addressed them in a firm, measured voice. "Lords and ladies, I welcome you to King's Landing. We come together to shape the fate of Westeros. We have bled too much, lost too many. Winter stands upon us, and we must ensure our people do not starve. We must stand united against raiders and foreign threats. If any among you wish to speak your doubts, let them be heard." A murmur rippled through the hall. Then a lord from the Riverlands stood, a Bracken or Blackwood. Jaime wasn't entirely sure. The man spoke of the devastation left by the wars, the need for support and justice. Another from the Reach offered proposals for rebuilding trade. A Dornish envoy demanded recompense for the loss of Prince Oberyn. Jaime calmly responded that while a baron's death was a tragedy, it was lawfully settled in a trial by combat. He expressed regret, but no admission of guilt. The conversation turned heated, accusations flying. Jaime let it run its course, then reminded them that continuing feuds would bring only more bloodshed. He proposed a new set of laws protecting travelers, guaranteeing safe passage across territories, encouraging trade. He sought to unify them around mutual benefit rather than retribution. For hours the debate raged. Jaime listened, intervened, cajoled, bartered. He offered Lannister gold to help rebuild certain war-torn areas. In return, those lords pledged to keep the king's peace. He skillfully navigated old grudges, appealing to common sense. And slowly, grudgingly, an outline of consensus emerged. There would be a new royal edict guaranteeing local autonomy and internal governance, so long as taxes and fealty were maintained. A portion of the crown's gold would be allocated to rebuild roads, ports, and fortifications shared among multiple regions. Jaime also vowed to address the complaints of Dorne in a separate negotiation, hoping to soothe their anger. By the day's end, a preliminary agreement was drafted. Not all were pleased, but most saw the benefit of avoiding another war. The king had displayed patience, a willingness to compromise, and a firm stance against chaos. Words spread among the lesser lords that the one-handed king was not merely a figurehead. He might lack the cruelty of Cersei or the cunning of Tywin, but he possessed a steady resolve forged in adversity. Many found that reason enough to lend cautious support. That night, Jaime withdrew to his quarters, exhausted in both mind and body. He peeled off the formal garments and set the crown aside. Bronn arrived with a jug of wine, giving him a wry grin. "A toast to your success, your grace, or is that too soon?" Jaime accepted the wine gratefully. "Success is a precarious word, Bronn, but I'll drink to a day without bloodshed." They raised cups and drank. The vintage was decent, though not the best. Jaime savored the warmth spreading through his chest, soothing some of the tension. He stared at the crown for a moment, the golden band reflecting candlelight. "Sometimes I wonder if it would be simpler to just hand it to someone else," he mused. Bronn snorted. "Too late for that. You're the poor sod wearing it. Get used to it." Jaime chuckled ruefully. "I suppose so." He paused, swirling the wine in his cup. "Who would have thought, a few years ago, that I'd sit the Iron Throne? We were mired in war. Chaos, betrayals at every turn. The realm shattered." Bronn shrugged. "Maybe all that was needed was someone crazy enough to duel the biggest bastard in the land. That's you." A memory flashed of Gregor Clegane's massive sword crashing down, a shriek of metal. Jaime shook off the recollection. "One monster down, too many others still loom." Bronn drained his cup. "You'll handle them, or not. Either way, you've done more than most." Night settled over King's Landing, but unlike times past, the city was calmer. No riotous mobs filled the streets. No wildfire conspiracies threatened to engulf them. Jaime had fashioned a fragile peace. Whether it would endure the trials of winter and the ambitions of men was uncertain. Yet for the first time in a long while, he felt the faint stirrings of hope. From King's Lair to King, an unlikely path, but perhaps the gods had a sense of humor. Or perhaps men made their own fates, forging redemption in the crucible of necessity. Before he slept, Jaime took one last look at the crown. In the flickering candlelight, the gold lions' heads etched along the band seemed to watch him. He allowed himself a small, weary smile. If he had the strength to defeat the mountain, maybe he had the strength to tame a kingdom. Either way, he would not shy from the attempt. The realm deserved that much. And so, lying in his chambers, his battered body yearning for rest, King Jaime Lannister closed his eyes, determined to face the challenges of the morrow with the same unyielding resolve that had led him to victory on that fateful day. The crown was his burden now, and he would bear it for as long as he could, one hand, one step, one day at a time. Jaime awakened the next morning to the soft glow of dawn filtering through the high windows. He lay in bed, blinking away the vestiges of sleep, aware that yet another gathering of the realm's lords waited for him. For a moment he allowed himself to forget the burden of the crown and the ache in his ribs, drifting in a haze of memory. He thought of his father, Tywin, always so composed and keen-eyed, and he remembered the day that Tywin had placed a hand on his shoulder, imparting some lesson on duty or on the ruthless realities of power. Now Jaime bore a title that even Tywin had never taken for himself. It felt surreal, and with each passing sunrise, the weight of kingship only grew heavier. He rose, every muscle protesting, and bathed quickly. By the time a pair of servants entered to help him don his clothing, he was already mentally walking through the tasks of the day. He needed to speak with Lord Veerwell regarding the northern envoys, who would arrive in the weeks to come. He needed to check on the state of the city's granaries. Rumor claimed a new outbreak of theft plagued the docks, likely carried out by opportunistic smugglers, working in the chaos that still lingered in the aftermath of so many wars. Then there was the matter of Dawn. The envoy had departed with carefully worded reassurances, but whether Dawn would openly accept his reign still remained unclear. He had no illusions that a man once known as the Kingslayer would be welcomed with open arms in Sunspear, especially after the tragedies that had transpired between Lannisters and Martells. Nonetheless, he settled the freshly laundered cloak over his shoulders, noticing that the threads at the collar were beginning to fray from near constant use. A small detail, but he found himself strangely comforted by such imperfections. He had once dismissed any sign of wear or tarnish as an affront to his vanity. Now the signs of life's grind reminded him that he was no longer the brash golden youth of his earlier years. Perhaps humility, hard-won though it might be, could serve him as well as skill with a sword had once done. As he left his chambers, gold cloaks stationed along the hallway bowed or saluted. Their presence had been doubled since rumors of plots against his life began to swirl. Whispers that some discontented elements in the city sought to remove the new king by any means. He did not relish living under constant guard, but caution was unavoidable. A single dagger in the dark could undo all the fragile progress he was making. Still, he offered the guards a polite nod and made his way toward the council chamber. Bronn appeared at his side, yawning as though he'd just awakened. "You're up early again," Bronn said, his tone half irritable, half amused. "Don't you ever sleep in? You're king, after all. You could proclaim a law that no one's allowed to bother you until midday." Jaime gave him a sidelong glance. "If I did that, half the city would be on fire before I opened my eyes. Besides, you're up, aren't you?" Bronn shrugged. "I'm a restless soul, or so all your business has made me. Once, I dreamed of buying a keep and some lands, living idle with a few comely wenches. Now, my keep is the Red Keep, and it's not quite the peaceful retreat I imagined." Loyalty. They stepped into the council chamber, where half a dozen men already awaited them around a table strewn with parchments and maps. Lord Veerwell inclined his head in greeting, and Sir Paxter Mullendore, the Master of Laws, rose to greet the king. Others in attendance included certain local lords and occasional visitors from different corners of the realm. They each waited for Jaime to take a seat. It had become routine in recent months. The king would arrive, hear the day's updates, and set policy. Jaime lowered himself onto the chair at the head of the table. A smaller version of the Iron Throne, the seat was built with gilded lion motifs on the arms. He detested such ostentation, but traditions were often hard to shake. The lords sat once he was settled. They began by reviewing reports of banditry along the Gold Road. The men Tarly had taken to the Stormlands were apparently faring well, capturing a nest of outlaws near Summerhall. Next came news of the Riverlands. Lord Edmure Tully had sent word that he would arrive soon to discuss fresh trade routes, aiming to replenish the coffers of Riverrun. Jaime noted that with approval. Despite the complicated history between Tullys and Lannisters, forging a new relationship was paramount. An undercurrent of tension grew as Lord Veerwell cleared his throat and unrolled a fresh scroll. "Your Grace," he said carefully, "we've received some troubling tidings from the sea. The Ironborn may be on the move again. Our informers suggest that Euron Greyjoy has gathered a new fleet and is prowling the waters around the Arbor. The Redwine fleet is powerful but battered from earlier conflicts. They may be unable to contend with a sudden onslaught if Euron chooses to strike in force. Now it's key. Jaime listened, frowning. Euron Greyjoy's name was often spoken in the same breath as madness, cruelty, and unbridled ambition. If the Iron Islands rose once again to pillage the coasts, it could spark another war, one Jaime could ill afford. The realm still reeled from too many conflicts. What are the chances he'll strike? Jaime asked. Virwell offered a small shrug. Our best guess is that Euron's unpredictable. He might raid the Arbor, or he might sail east for Essos. But if he's raising sails now, in the middle of winter, that suggests either desperation or some cunning plan. Ness. Jaime drummed his fingers on the tabletop, his gold hand resting stiffly on his thigh. We can't spare enough ships to mount a preemptive assault, not with trade finally beginning to blossom. He turned to the master of ships, a man named Garin Sunglass, who had replaced others too inexperienced or corrupt. How many vessels can we dispatch to the Arbor without leaving King's Landing vulnerable? Sunglass hesitated. Perhaps a dozen war galleys, more if we recall some from the narrow sea patrols. That would leave Braavosi merchant shipping less protected though. Jaime weighed the choice. Send 10 Give them specific orders to coordinate with the Red Wine fleet, guard the Arbor's harbor, and keep watch for any sign of Euron. If he attacks, they must hold until we can send reinforcements. Let it be known that any foe threatening the crown's peace will face swift retribution. Satisfied murmurs and a smattering of agreement circled the table. The next items included local disputes, the question of the faith's involvement in the reconstruction of the Great Septi, and an ongoing inquiry about a missing merchant caravan from Volantis. Jaime kept careful notes in his mind, though he was grateful for the scribes who recorded every word. By the time the meeting ended, the sun was high, and Jaime's temples throbbed from the weight of so many decisions. Yet he could not rest. Lord Bracken's party had just arrived at the city gates, and he was expected to greet them as part of continuing reconciliation efforts with the Riverlands. Rising from his seat, Jaime suppressed a sigh. Once upon a time his days had been spent training in the yard or flirting with court ladies. Now duty consumed every hour. He had known, in some abstract way, that being king would be no easy feat. Still, he had not anticipated the unceasing drudgery of policy-making and diplomacy. Taking a moment, he rolled his shoulders and exchanged a glance with Bronn. The sellsword gave him a wry grin as if to say, "This is what you asked for, eh?" Jaime couldn't help a faint smile in return. It was reassuring, in a way, that amid all the formality, there were still men like Bronn to keep him tethered to reality. He made his way through the corridors and descended to the grand courtyard of the Red Keep. There, on the broad stones where he had once crossed blades with the mountain, a small party of riverlords stood, their sigils bright in the midday sun. Lord Jonas Bracken had come with a modest retinue. A few knights, a handful of bannermen, and 1 or 2 ladies of his household. Jaime had learned enough of House Bracken's history to know they were entangled in old grudges, particularly with the Blackwoods, but at least they were outwardly willing to treat with him. He also knew that if he managed to earn Bracken's favor, the Blackwoods would inevitably be suspicious. Such was the way of feuds that spanned generations. When Jaime emerged, the visitors inclined their heads, though few bent the knee fully. Bracken was broad-shouldered with bristly hair and a face that suggested a permanent scowl. He wore a surcoat emblazoned with his red stallion. The moment he rose, he spoke bluntly. "Your Grace, I've come a long way from the Riverlands to see if all these rumors of peace are more than empty talk." Jaime forced a polite smile. "Welcome to King's Landing, Lord Bracken. I trust your journey was uneventful." Bracken shrugged. "Cold and long, but free of bandits, thanks to your patrols. That's a better sign than we've had in years." "Then we're off to a good start," Jaime said. He gestured for Bracken to join him in the solar, but the Lord shook his head. "If it's all the same to you, I'd prefer we talk in the open air. Too many whispers in small chambers for my taste." Bracken glanced around the courtyard. "It was here, wasn't it, that you slew that giant hulk of a knight? I still recall the day the mountain crushed that poor Dornishman's skull. Never imagined I'd see him bested." A flicker of memory made Jaime tense. He tried not to think too long on the brutal duel that had left him battered and half certain of death. Yes, he answered quietly, it happened here. He waited for Bracken to continue, aware that the mention of the mountain's death was often used by lords trying to gauge what sort of man Jaime was. Bracken nodded. Well, I've no quarrel with you over that. He was a beast. Still, they say you fought him with one hand. A feat indeed, though I suspect cunning played a greater part than strength. I won't deny cunning was involved, Jaime said. Strength alone would have been suicide. Bracken made a low noise in his throat that might have been amusement. Good. Cunning can serve the realm as well as any warhammer, so let us see if your cunning can help the Riverlands. We've problems enough, your grace. Broken roads, burnt fields, refugees wandering, and the threat of more outlaws cropping up as soon as the snows melt. Jaime signaled for one of the stewards to bring them chairs, and thus they sat in the courtyard beneath the weak winter sun, exchanging concerns. Jaime pledged that shipments of grain and seed would continue, that men would be sent to help repair roads, that the king's peace would extend to the Riverlands as well as the Crown lands. In return, he asked Bracken to commit to the new royal edicts, to share certain tariffs along the Trident and aid in patrolling the crossroad routes. Bracken listened, stroking his chin, occasionally tossing out curt questions. Over the course of an hour, a basic agreement took shape, nothing final, but enough to keep Bracken engaged. When they finished, the Lord rose. Well enough, your grace. I'll remain in the city a few days to hammer out the details. Thank you for taking the time to meet. Of course, Jaime said. I want the Riverlands to prosper. We've had enough war. Indeed, it is. Bracken gave him a measured look. So we have. I'll see you at the feast tonight then. Yes, I'll be there. Jaime watched him stride off, retinue following. By hosting small feasts for visiting lords, Jaime hoped to soften hearts and encourage alliances. It wasn't the type of feasting he'd once enjoyed, where he might simply impress the court with his wit and good looks. Now, every courtesy felt like a calculated move in a game of precarious balance. Yet it was necessary. He lingered in the courtyard a moment longer, his gaze drifting to the space where Gregor Clegane had collapsed in a pool of thick blood. The memory made his stomach twist. He still couldn't quite believe he'd walked away from that encounter alive. On instinct, he flexed his left hand. The phantom sense of a sword in his right hand would never entirely fade, though that hand was lost. He whispered a silent vow to himself. I will use this new chance for something better than yet another war. Then he turned on his heel, heading inside to prepare for the rest of the day. True to form, the day's demands did not relent. He met with the royal steward to discuss how best to lodge the influx of visiting lords. Some had arrived earlier than expected, while others delayed, citing the condition of roads or the pressing tasks at home. Late in the afternoon, Jaime received Sir Adam Marbrand's latest report from the Reach. Scattered raids by outlaws had been suppressed, and the roads near Highgarden were once more open to trade. Marbrand wrote that the Tyrells, under Lord Leo, were gradually regaining some measure of influence, though they remained a shadow of their former power. Jaime knew the realm would rely heavily on the Reach for supplies if winter lingered for years, so strengthening that region was paramount. Eventually, the hour of the feast arrived. Jaime dressed in a simpler attire than the traditional golden raiment. A dark crimson doublet embroidered with the Lannister lion on one breast, a black cloak pinned with a lion's head clasp. He wore the crown, though, as ceremony demanded. Walking to the great hall, he was flanked by a cadre of gold cloaks. The hall itself was still marked by scars, both physical and spiritual, from the wars. Repairs to the battered pillars and the smoke-stained walls were underway, but the process was slow. Yet the tables were laid out with the best the crown could provide. Roasted meats, spiced wine, fresh bread from the city's ovens. Torches and candles lent a warm glow, dispelling the winter gloom. Musicians played softly in one corner, and servants circulated with flagons of wine. The lords and ladies who were present rose when Jaime entered. He inclined his head to them, then took his seat at the high table. Bronn was at his right, though relegated to a slightly lower seat, as custom demanded a measure of hierarchy. Across the table were representatives from the Westerlands, small lords who had come for trade negotiations. Further down sat Lord Bracken and his men, along with a smattering of Crownland's lords. The conversation was polite if subdued. There were few raucous laughs or toasts. Everyone seemed keenly aware that this was an occasion for political maneuvering, not casual merriment. Partway through the meal, conversation turned to talk of the north, of the rumoured parley that would soon happen at Moat Cailin. Some lords speculated that the new king in the north was an upstart, or a distant cousin of the Stark line. Others said the north might simply want to be left in peace. Jaime offered little in the way of direct comment, though inside, he was tense with anticipation. If the northern leaders chose to break from the Iron Throne entirely, war might erupt again, and all the fragile alliances Jaime had built would shatter. The best outcome would be some measure of reconciliation, perhaps with limited autonomy for the north. He sipped his wine, thinking of the letters he had sent. Calm, reasoned, offering mutual benefit. The answer that would arrive in the next weeks might well determine whether Westeros truly began to heal or descended into fresh turmoil. Once the feast concluded, Jaime made sure to speak briefly with each significant guest. He found the exercise draining, small compliments, half smiles, careful inquiries. But it bore results. Lord Bracken seemed more cordial than earlier. A few knights from the Crownlands asked if they might petition for lands or titles in the Riverlands, which Jaime politely deflected for the time being. One or two lesser lords approached him with trade proposals. He offered them to Verwell or Sunglass to handle. By the end of the night, his head throbbed, and he yearned for his bed. But as he made his way toward his chambers, Bronn caught up with him in the corridor. "You realize you've made about a dozen new promises today," Bronn said, arms folded. "Sending grain to this place, men to that, building roads here, forging alliances there. You've got to watch you don't stretch yourself too thin." Jaime exhaled. "I know. But if I make no promises, no one trusts me. If I promise too much, I might fail to deliver. I need to strike a balance." "Nah, no." Bronn gave a lazy shrug. "Just don't let them see if you falter. I'm used to seeing kings and high lords overstep and lose their heads, literally." With a grim nod, Jaime patted Bronn's shoulder. "I appreciate the warning. Let's hope I don't end up like that. I'll see you on the morrow." He continued alone to his chambers, dismissing the gold cloaks at the door, though two remained stationed outside. Inside, the room was lit by a single lamp. The crown felt heavy, so he lifted it off and set it on a side table. He began to unfasten his doublet, but a prickle at the back of his neck made him pause. Something felt off, some sense of movement in the shadows. Carefully, he scanned the room. Nothing but flickering lamplight and the swirl of his own reflection in a polished metal mirror. He shook his head, half chiding himself for paranoia. Yet the feeling persisted. He moved stealthily across the floorboards, checking behind a tall tapestry. Nothing. Opening a closet revealed only spare cloaks. Still, his instincts, honed by decades of warfare and vigilance, told him someone had been here. He touched the bed hangings, which swayed a bit too freely, as if recently disturbed. Then he crouched and peered beneath the bed. Nothing. Rising, he thought to call the guards, but what could he say? A ghost in the night? He sighed. Perhaps the burdens of the day had frayed his nerves. Nonetheless, he locked the door from the inside, a rarely used precaution, and approached the lamp. After a moment, he let out a soft laugh at himself, extinguished the light, and lay on the bed, sword propped near at hand. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by half-dreams of footsteps in the dark. By morning, the sense of unease had faded somewhat, and new tasks beckoned. He rose early, dressing in more practical attire. With a full day ahead, he didn't want to be laden with the ceremonial cloak and gold filigree. He belted on his sword. Though he seldom needed it, a king who'd won his place through combat ought not appear unprepared. And that niggling suspicion from the night before lingered, driving him to keep his steel close. Breakfast was a rushed affair of bread and salted fish in the small dining hall. Bronn joined him halfway through, mouth full as he grumbled about the dryness of the fish. Jaime accepted it in silence, eyes distant. He couldn't shake the notion that the Red Keep was full of hidden watchers. Perhaps it was always so. Courtiers, spies, and would-be assassins. As king, he was an even bigger target than he'd been as a kingslayer or member of the Kingsguard. A page interrupted his thoughts, bowing quickly. "Your Grace, Sir Balon Swan has returned from the Vale. He awaits you in the throne room." Jaime stood at once, ignoring the pang of hunger still in his stomach. He had sent Swan to the Vale some time ago with instructions to encourage a more formal alliance. The Vale was a place of caution and tradition, and while Petyr Baelish was long gone, some said dead, others claimed fled, the lords there were slow to trust. If Balon had returned, that meant either progress or a dead end. He made his way to the throne room. The great doors opened, and he strode inside to see Balon Swan standing near the base of the Iron Throne, fully armored, dusty from the road. The man bowed deeply. Jaime walked forward, halting at the dais before the throne. He hadn't planned to sit it yet, but the official nature of Balon's arrival seemed to demand it. With a slight hesitation, Jaime ascended the steps and lowered himself onto the Iron Throne, the metal spikes and twisted swords biting into his shoulders as they always did. He wished the blacksmiths could have hammered the thing into something less uncomfortable, but tradition held too tight a grip. "Sir Balon," Jaime said, "you returned from the Vale. What news?" Balon rose from his bow, expression neutral. "Your Grace, I bring tidings both good and cautious. The lords of the Vale are inclined to recognize your rule, provided certain guarantees are set forth regarding their autonomy." Jaime processed that. "And do they name a Warden of the East, or is that also pending approval?" Balon hesitated. "They have not confirmed a single candidate. A council of Vale lords effectively governs. Young Lord Robert Arryn died some months ago." His tone was neutral, though a flicker of pity crossed his eyes. "They haven't chosen a replacement for the Erie's seat. Some say a distant cousin of House Arryn might be found. Others talk of bestowing the seat on whichever prominent lord they favor most. But for now they will allow your Grace to hold the official title of Protector, so long as you do not interfere in local matters of inheritance." Jaime steepled his left-hand fingers, letting his gold hand rest on the throne's arm. "I can accept that. The Vale stands on its own, but acknowledges the crown. We can proceed on that basis. Did they mention taxes?" Balon exhaled. "They will pay the usual royal taxes, provided the crown invests in maintaining the Bloody Gate and certain roads. Also, they require some assurance that your men will not garrison in the Vale without their express request." A faint smile curved Jaime's lips. "Ever cautious, these Vale lords. Very well, I'll grant them that. Once we finalize the terms, we'll sign a formal treaty. Well done, Sir Balon." Balon bowed again. "Thank you, Your Grace. There is one more matter. I have heard rumors that some group of Vale Knights still holds to a lost Targaryen cause. They mention Daenerys Targaryen, or perhaps her progeny, though no one truly knows. I found no concrete evidence of a real Targaryen presence, but the rumor alone stokes certain hearts." Jaime's mood darkened a fraction. "I see. If there is any real Targaryen heir stirring up trouble, we must know. Keep your ears open." He paused. "For now we've enough to worry about with Euron Greyjoy and the uncertain North. Dredging up Targaryen ghosts will only complicate matters." Balon nodded. "Of course, Your Grace. I'll stay vigilant. Is there anything further?" "No. Go rest, Sir Balon. You've earned it." As Balon left, Jaime lingered on the Iron Throne, absorbing this new piece of the puzzle. He recalled the stories of Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons, who had once threatened to conquer Westeros. So many rumors had drifted across the narrow sea in past years. Some claimed she died in battle against warlocks, others that she vanished in the Red Waste, and still others that she sailed west, only to be lost in a storm. None could say for sure. But Jaime knew how dangerous such rumors could be. If even a shred of truth remained, the realm might face a formidable new threat. Dragons or no dragons, the name Targaryen still held a powerful allure for many. He rose from the throne, ignoring the twinge in his back. The hall was mostly empty. He noticed a few gold cloaks at the periphery, and a scattering of minor functionaries. He descended the steps, bidding them proceed with their duties. Another day, another set of challenges. He recalled Eddard Stark's old complaint. that sitting a throne was 1,000 times harder than winning one. Only now did he fully grasp how true that was. Outside, the corridors hummed with quiet activity. Jaime headed to his solar to review a fresh batch of correspondence. On his way, he encountered Maester Pharos, who was short of stature and had a thin grey beard. Pharos bowed and handed Jaime a sealed letter. "Your Grace, this arrived by Raven not an hour past." Jaime took it, noting the seal with curiosity. A single direwolf's head pressed into the wax. The North. Excitement and a thread of worry coiled within him. "Thank you," he said, and continued to his solar, breaking the seal once inside. Bronn had drifted off somewhere, so Jaime read in solitude. The message was short, written in a blunt, unadorned script. It proposed that a delegation from the north would soon travel south, not to Moat Cailin, but directly to King's Landing. They expressed willingness to negotiate an accord, though they made it clear that the north would not willingly bend the knee unless certain conditions were met. The immediate release of all northern prisoners still held, if any, the formal recognition of the North's right to self-govern in internal matters and the appointment of a Stark, or a Stark-supported candidate, as Warden of the North. No mention was made of the King in the North title. Jaime speculated that perhaps they decided it was more prudent to discuss that face-to-face. He let out a slow breath. This was better than an outright refusal. At least they were sending envoys. Of course, the demands would rankle some southern lords, especially the wording that implied near independence. But if Jaime refused, the North might close its borders, effectively seceding. Another war to unify the Seven Kingdoms by force was unthinkable, especially with winter deepening. People would starve long before a southern army made it through the neck. Better to talk, to find a compromise. If that meant ceding some authority, Jaime was prepared to do so. Let the proud southerners call him weak if they liked. He'd rather be seen as weak than drown the land in more blood. He drafted a reply at once, inviting the northern delegation to come under royal protection, promising safe conduct, and indicating readiness to negotiate. He kept his words cordial, even a bit warm, referencing old alliances. He sealed the message with the royal sigil and gave it to Maester Pharos to send by Raven. Then he sat back, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The North, the Vale, the Riverlands, Dawn. All corners of Westeros demanded his attention. Sometimes he wanted to run from it all, to mount a horse and ride far away, free as a hedge knight. But that was not an option he could entertain, not after all he had endured to gain this crown. And not with so many depending on his success. A soft knock sounded at the door. "Enter," he called. Bronn slipped in, leaning casually against the frame. "Heard there's news from the north," he said. Jaime nodded. "They're coming here to parley. That's progress of a sort." Bronn shrugged. "Or a trap. They might bring a small army hidden in their baggage train." "I doubt it," Jaime said with a faint smirk. "But we'll be cautious. Have the gold cloaks keep watch. Also ensure we make them feel welcome when they arrive. No bristling hostility." Bronn snorted. "I'll make sure they get the royal treatment. That'll confuse them enough." Jaime shook his head, feeling a reluctant amusement at Bronn's irreverence. With a wave of dismissal, he turned back to his papers, though his gaze drifted to the window and the faint swirl of grey clouds. The day was cold, and he sensed a storm might soon blow in from the sea. Each region in Westeros was bracing for winter's harshness, though the exact severity varied. If the north was struggling with deep snows, he could only imagine the hardships that would follow if the southern farmlands also froze over. The crown's granaries, supplemented by the Reach, were a bulwark, but might not suffice for a long winter. He spent the remainder of the day dealing with smaller tasks. He authorized a pay increase for the gold cloaks, a move recommended by Lord Varywell to maintain loyalty. He spoke with the Master of Laws about new courts to hear land disputes. Late in the afternoon he found a spare hour, and took the chance to walk through the city accompanied by a discreet escort. He wore a plain cloak with the hood drawn, hoping to move among the people without being recognized at once. King's Landing was slowly healing. Shops had reopened, markets bustled with produce from the Crownlands and some from the Reach. Yet pockets of poverty remained. Jaime passed an alley where he saw ragged children huddled, begging for scraps. He paused, removing a coin or two from his pouch, and pressed them into a small, dirty hand. The child stared up at him, wide-eyed, not fully realizing who stood before him. Then the child muttered a word of thanks and scurried away. Jaime felt a pang, recalling Myrcella, recalling Tommen. His children, now gone. He inhaled, letting the cold air burn in his lungs, and walked on. He stopped at the site of the Great Sept. Where once a magnificent structure had stood, now only ruins and scaffolding rose. It was said that the explosion of wildfire orchestrated by Cersei had shattered the very foundations. Jaime lingered, remembering that day. He had not been there for the disaster, but he'd seen the aftermath. So many lost, including the High Sparrow and Queen Margaery. The city had reeled in horror. Now, the Faith sought to rebuild, though the Crown's coffers could only provide so much assistance. Workers bustled about, hauling stones and timber. A few septons in humble robes offered blessings. On impulse, Jaime approached them, nodding politely, half expecting reproach. "Blessings upon you, my son," one of the septons said softly. "We thank you for the Crown's help in restoring the Faith Center." Jaime glanced at the half-built structure. It's slow progress. The septon offered a sad smile. "We labor as we can. The Seven have not abandoned us. Each stone laid is a step toward redemption." Jaime nodded, uncertain. "I hope the Faith is able to see that the Crown wishes for peace, not further conflict." The septon studied him, as though recognizing him beneath the hood. The older man bowed his head. "We pray for the King's wisdom and mercy. The realm has suffered enough." There was nothing more to say. Jaime left a small donation in a battered coffer, then walked away. Redemption. The word clung to him. For all he'd done, for all Cersei had done, for all the Lannisters had wrought, was redemption truly possible? The idea spurred conflicting emotions. Yet part of him wanted to believe that better days could be built from the rubble. He returned to the Red Keep as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in crimson and gold. He tried to ignore the unsettling memory that the same colors once described Cersei's hair and the Lannister lion. Everything, it seemed, was a reminder of the past. By the time he reached his chambers, shadows stretched across the floor. He dismissed his escort, feeling restless. Perhaps he should train in the yard, though the night air was chill. He retrieved his sword, ignoring the slight protest of his healing ribs, and made his way to the practice yard. There, a few gold cloaks were sparring by torchlight, practicing forms. They paused when he arrived, bowing respectfully. Jaime set to work on a training dummy. He warmed his muscles with a series of slow strikes, focusing on footwork and technique. Even with his left hand, he'd come a long way. Over the months, he'd built a competence that surpassed what he'd imagined possible when he first lost his sword hand. The memory of the mountain's crushing blows flickered through his mind. He recalled how he survived by speed and cunning. With each strike against the dummy, he exhaled frustration and tension. The gold cloaks watched in hushed admiration. At one point, Bronn arrived, leaning on the fence. So this is how the Great King unwinds, hacking at straw in the dark? Jaime didn't break rhythm. Better than lying in bed fretting about Euron Greyjoy or Targaryen pretenders. Bronn smirked. True enough. Care for a real spar? What or Jaime near a party? Why? Jaime paused, breathing hard. Aye, let's do it. The gold cloaks parted, forming a circle around them. Bronn drew his own blade, a worn but reliable longsword. He smirked, rolling his shoulders. No crippling the king, though. You might upset the realm. They started slow, exchanging light taps, the rasp of steel on steel echoing in the torchlit yard. Jaime was cautious at first. Bronn was a cunning fighter, less reliant on the brute force that had once bested him in earlier left-handed sessions. But now Jaime felt a certain confidence. He parried, stepped into Bronn's guard, tried a low slash. Bronn twisted away, launching a counter that Jaime blocked. They circled, swords singing in the cool air. Sweat formed on Jaime's brow. At times he felt a twinge in his ribs, or a phantom ache in his missing hand, but he pushed through it. This was a test of the skill he'd honed, piece by painful piece, since the day his right hand was lost. Their spar lasted a good while, each pushing the other to find an edge. Bronn, quick-footed, slipped past Jaime's guard and tapped the side of his cuirass. "Dead," he quipped with a grin. "Again, King." Jaime scowled good-naturedly, reset his stance, and they went at it again. This time, Jaime feinted a high cut, only to pivot and catch Bronn on the thigh with the flat of his blade. "Dead yourself," Jaime said, breathing hard. Bronn laughed. "Not bad. You're improving, one hand." They resumed once more, steel flashing, feet shifting on the dusty ground. Each pass ended with one scoring a hypothetical kill against the other, until at last Jaime's lungs burned and his arms trembled from exertion. He lowered his sword, chest heaving. Bronn wiped sweat from his brow and grinned. "That'll do. I'd say you're in fine shape for a king with more burdens than a donkey." Jaime forced a smile, though inside he couldn't help the surge of pride that he still had some edge. The gold cloaks gave a light cheer. One or two men pounded their fists in a show of respect. Jaime realized how important such displays were. A king who could fight for himself inspired confidence in an uncertain world. With a final salute, he handed his sword to a squire to be cleaned and sheathed, then made his way back into the keep. Night had truly fallen now, a sharp wind sweeping in from Blackwater Bay. As he walked the corridors, he felt that prickle again, the sense of being watched. He glanced over his shoulder, seeing only flickering torches against the walls. No one else seemed to be about, though the gold cloaks occasionally passed on patrol. Perhaps it was the normal paranoia of any monarch. He pressed on, shaking off the feeling, and returned to his chambers. This time, he checked every corner before sitting down. The lamp's glow illuminated only empty space. Satisfied, he sat at his desk. A small meal waited for him, a crust of bread, some cheese, a cup of watered wine. He ate slowly, eyes on the crown that rested on a nearby shelf. The metal glinted dully. He wondered if perhaps someone in the keep sought to spirit that crown away, or slip a knife between his ribs. Yet no rumor of immediate danger had reached him. Sometimes the greatest threats were subtle, poisoners, conspirators, or simply alliances formed behind his back. He would stay vigilant, but he knew he couldn't chase shadows forever. After finishing his meal, he managed to get a few hours of reading done. Old scrolls about the laws of the Seven Kingdoms, updates on the city's population, even a tome about the Targaryen conquest. Finally, fatigue claimed him. He latched the door and lay down, drifting into a restless sleep. The next morning, he woke to another flurry of engagements. A messenger arrived from Tarly's forces in the Stormlands, reporting success in clearing bandits near the Wendwater. Another letter came from Highgarden, this time bearing Lord Leo Tyrell's signature, thanking the crown for its assistance in rebuilding roads. The sense of cautious optimism spread. Jaime tried not to let it lull him into complacency. Winter had only just begun, and many dangers lurked beyond the horizon. Among the day's petitions was one from the Crownlands themselves. A group of small folk farmers sought relief from debts they owed to a local landlord. Jaime listened in the presence of Master of Laws Mullendor, a gaunt man who nonetheless had a keen sense of fairness. The farmers claimed the landlord demanded excessive interest, far beyond their means, and threatened to seize their lands if they couldn't pay. Mullendor explained that the law permitted interest, but usury was frowned upon, and the king could intervene. Jaime asked pointed questions, assessing the situation. He didn't want to create a precedent of bailing out every farmer, but nor did he wish to see them reduced to starvation. In the end, he decreed a partial mediation. The landlord must reduce the debt to a more reasonable sum, with the crown guaranteeing a portion if the farmers made an effort to repay over the next year. It was a delicate balance. The farmers, wide-eyed, knelt in gratitude. The landlord, bristling, could only bow and accept the royal judgment. Jaime left that audience feeling a measure of satisfaction. Yes, 1,000 more disputes like it would arise, but each time a bit of trust might be gained. Trust that the monarchy wasn't a distant beast devouring the weak, but a stabilizing force. The days of Tywin's iron fist or Joffrey's cruelty had to be replaced by something better, or Westeros would devour itself. Outside the throne room he spotted Lord Varwell hurrying toward him, face etched with concern. Jaime's heart tightened. "What is it now?" he asked. Virwell inclined his head. Your Grace, a raven arrived from the arbor not long ago. It seems Euron Greyjoy made a sudden raid on a convoy of red wine ships. He captured or sank several, then vanished into open waters. Our war galleys were too far away to intervene. Nay, I ought. Jaime sighed. Casualties. They're still counting, but it seems the loss is significant, especially in goods. Wine, grain, a few supply ships meant for Old Town. The Red Wine fleet is in pursuit, but Euron's cunning with the seas is notorious. They fear he may return with greater force. A flicker of frustration crossed Jaime's face. We need to do more. Summon Master of Ships Sunglass and instruct him to redirect more ships to support the Red Wines. We can't let Euron terrorize the coasts unchecked. Your Grace, that might weaken our presence in the narrow sea. I know. Jaime clenched his jaw. But we can't afford to lose the Arbor or Old Town to repeated raids. Send the ships. We'll deal with any repercussions later. No. Virwell bowed, hastening away to carry out the order. Jaime stood in the corridor, seething inwardly. Euron Greyjoy was exactly the sort of chaos the realm didn't need. If the Ironborn grew bolder, they might devastate the coastal economies, incite rebellion, or hamper critical supply lines. Jaime saw no easy solution. The Iron Islands were notoriously difficult to subjugate, especially in winter. The best approach was to contain Euron until the realm was stable enough to muster a proper navy to drive him off or force a treaty. As he stewed over it, Sir Balon Swan approached again, this time with better news. The lords of the Stormlands had all but pledged loyalty, pending a formal oath ceremony. Jaime nodded, forcing a smile. One problem overshadowed by another. That seemed the constant refrain of kingship. In the week that followed, Jaime's routine hardly varied. Meetings, judgments, letters, occasional training sessions in the yard, feasts for incoming lords. He took care to avoid favoring the Westerlands too blatantly, aware that it might provoke jealousy in the other regions. He carefully distributed new positions among worthy knights from multiple areas, hoping to foster a sense of unity. The City Watch reported fewer crimes in the capital than in recent memory, a small victory. Yet overshadowing everything was the knowledge that the northern delegation would arrive soon, that Euron Greyjoy might strike again at any moment, and that the realm's stability balanced on a knife's edge. Then one cold morning, word spread through the city that the Northerners had crossed the Blackwater Rush, and would reach the gates by midday. Jaime summoned his small council, deciding on the best way to greet them. He wanted to show respect, without relinquishing royal authority. Ultimately, he resolved to meet them personally outside the city gates. Some lords advised him it was too great a gesture, that the king should make the Northerners come to him. But Jaime insisted. He'd learned that a measure of respect could go a long way, and the North had reason to distrust the Iron Throne after the betrayals of the past. So, near midday, Jaime rode out on a dapple grey mare, accompanied by a modest retinue of gold cloaks and banners, bearing the royal sigil, a crowned lion. The air was crisp, a faint drizzle falling. Waiting at the crossroads south of the city, he gazed into the distance until he spotted the dark shapes of riders approaching. As they drew nearer, he noted their battered cloaks, the sigils of wolves, and various northern houses, Mormont, Glover, Serwyn, others. A large black dire-wolf banner hung limp in the damp air, though the famed beasts themselves were rarely seen these days. At the head of the column rode a tall woman with red-brown hair bound in braids, her face stern but composed. Beside her was a shorter man with a grizzled beard, wearing heavy leathers. They halted. The woman dismounted and came forward. Jaime rode up a few paces, then swung down from his horse. They stood facing each other in the drizzle. The gold cloaks fanned out around Jaime, while a few northern guards did the same for the woman. She dipped her head, though she did not bend the knee. "I am Lady Sansa Stark," she said in a clear voice. "I come as representative of the North, empowered by the will of the Northern Lords." Jaime drew a slow breath. Sansa Stark. He had last seen her as a frightened girl in King's Landing, overshadowed by Joffrey's cruelty. Yet this woman before him bore little resemblance to that timid child. She looked composed, regal in her own right, with a quiet dignity that reminded him a bit of her mother, Catelyn. He inclined his head in return. "Lady Sansa, welcome back to King's Landing. I am King Jaime Lannister." She let a flicker of something cross her face, but it wasn't quite a smile. "King Jaime, the North has received your invitation. We come to hear your terms and to speak our own." He gestured to the city walls in the distance. "I propose we convene in the Red Keep. You have my word that you and your retinue shall have safe conduct." Behind Sansa, the bearded man, Lord Glover perhaps, gave Jaime a hard stare. "We'll hold you to that promise, Lannister." Sansa lifted a hand, silencing him. "We accept your word," she said to Jaime. "Let it be so." Jaime bowed slightly. "Then let us ride in together. You'll have quarters prepared, and once you've had time to rest from your journey, we can discuss our shared future." With a nod, Sansa returned to her horse, gracefully mounting. Jaime remounted his mare, turning to lead the way. The gold cloaks parted, forming an escort. As the combined party headed back toward the city, Jaime felt his heart pound. Sansa Stark, alive and grown, come to negotiate the fate of the North. He remembered Tyrion's fleeting marriage to her, how that had ended in tragedy and chaos. He also remembered how deeply the North had suffered under the Lannisters after Ned Stark's execution and the Red Wedding. Guilt pricked him, but he steeled himself. He was king now, and she was a high lady with her own authority. Perhaps together they could forge a peace. Or perhaps they would fail, and war would rise again. The city gates yawned open, and the procession filed in. Small folk lined the streets, curious about these northern riders. Some recognized the direwolf banner, murmuring among themselves. Others simply cheered half-heartedly, enthralled by the novelty of something new. Sansa held herself erect in the saddle, scanning the city with a somber expression. Jaime wondered what memories this place stirred in her. She had once been a prisoner here, subjected to Joffrey's torment. They made their way to the Red Keep. The stable hands rushed out to take the horses, while Jaime led Sansa and her key companions inside. He'd arranged for them to have comfortable quarters in one of the castle's refurbished towers. As they walked, Sansa maintained a polite facade, though she occasionally gazed at the corridors with an unreadable look. Jaime introduced her to a few members of his court, Master of Laws Mullendore, Lord Virwell, and Sir Balon Swand. Bronn was present too, eyeing the northerners warily. Lord Glover and a couple of Mormont men cast suspicious glances at the Lannisters. "I understand your retinue numbers nearly 30, Jaime said to Sansa as they reached the tower steps. "Rooms have been prepared for all of them. I trust you'll find them suitable." "We thank you," she replied. "My people will be grateful for warmth and food. We've ridden hard." Jaime gave a short bow. "I'll have servants bring hot meals to your chambers. If you wish to refresh yourselves, please do so. When you're ready, we can meet in the solar to begin our talks. Or tomorrow morning, if you prefer." She considered him. "Tomorrow morning, then. I should speak with my advisors first." "Very well." Jaime inclined his head. "Until then, my lady." She turned and ascended the steps, the northern lords following. Jaime watched them go, exhaling slowly. The official negotiations would begin soon. And with Sansa Stark at the forefront, the talks would carry the symbolic weight of House Stark's storied legacy. He prayed they could set aside the bitterness of the past. But he knew it would not be simple. Northern pride was fierce, and the wounds inflicted by House Lannister ran deep. He retired to his own solar, summoning the small council. They discussed how best to approach the North's demands. Some urged him to be firm, to remind the Northerners that the Crown's authority was absolute. Others counseled compromise, fearful of renewed war. Jaime listened, letting the debate swirl. Finally, he raised a hand, silencing them. "We'll not repeat the mistakes that led to Ned Stark's execution or the Red Wedding," he said quietly. "Those actions were the beginning of all this chaos. Let it be known that we seek a fair accord. The North has always been unique, with its own traditions. We can grant them that autonomy, so long as they acknowledge the king and support the realm when needed." A flurry of mixed reactions followed, but Jaime stood by his words. The meeting dispersed late, with no firm consensus except that tomorrow's negotiations were critical. If the North refused to bend, the realm might crumble into separate kingdoms. Jaime sensed a quiet dread in the air. That night, as he took a meal in his chambers, Jaime's thoughts drifted to Sansa's face. He remembered a shy girl with auburn hair in the court of King's Landing, overshadowed by a brutal Joffrey. Now she was a poised woman, shaped by hardship. He felt a pang of remorse for what she had endured. Would she be able to see him as anything but a Lannister, part of the family that had destroyed hers? He set aside his trencher, appetite lost. Outside the wind howled. Winter was truly upon them. The realm teetered on the brink of a new chapter, and whether it would be written in blood or in peace remained to be seen. Jaime rose, moving to the window. The lights of King's Landing flickered below, a vast sprawl of humanity clinging to hope for stability. He whispered a vow into the cold air, to find a way forward that did not involve more slaughter, if such a thing was possible. At dawn, the negotiations began in the King's Solar, a spacious chamber with tall windows overlooking the sea. Jaime sat at a long table, the crown before him, flanked by members of his council. Across from him sat Sansa Stark, accompanied by Lord Glover, Lady Mormont, and a few others whose sigils Jaime did not immediately recognize. The tension was palpable. Sansa spoke first, her voice steady. "We appreciate your hospitality, King Jaime. The North has no desire for renewed bloodshed, but we cannot forget what befell us. We lost thousands in the War of the Five Kings. House Stark itself was nearly exterminated. We would protect the North from ever again facing such devastation at the hands of Southern politics." Jaime listened, nodding solemnly. "I understand. You wish for security, for the freedom to govern your own affairs. I respect that. Yet the crown cannot simply ignore a great region of Westeros standing apart. We must be united, or the realm risks fracturing. We have Euron Greyjoy raiding our shores, and whispers of foreign threats. Winter is here, and unity is our shield against the storms." "Entonai." Sansa's eyes flickered. "We do not intend to stand apart if the realm faces a true external threat. But we need guarantees. A Stark or Stark-chosen warden overseeing the North. The right to collect and distribute taxes as we see fit, with only a reasonable tribute to the crown. Full authority over our laws. And a promise that no Northern lord or lady will be seized or executed without being brought to the North for trial first." "Noani." Molandor pursed his lips, looking to Jaime. Jaime paused, considering. "Some of that is acceptable. A Stark as Warden of the North. Yes, I can see the sense. The North has always been loyal to Winterfell's line, so long as they remain loyal to the crown. As for taxes, we can work out a fair arrangement. Same with the application of law, though the crown reserves the right to intervene if the realm's peace is threatened." Lord Glover interjected. "We do not want the crown's men interfering in our business." Jaime gave him a measured look. "Only if there's a matter that directly affects the entire realm, such as open rebellion or harboring outlaws who threaten the South. Otherwise, your local governance is your own. But the crown must retain the right to step in if the North chooses to raise arms against us, or if dangerous criminals find sanctuary behind your borders." Sansa inclined her head. "That seems reasonable, provided we are the first to handle such matters ourselves. If we show we can punish criminals who harm the realm, that should suffice." Jaime nodded. "Agreed, in principle. What about trade routes? I propose free movement of goods through the neck, with minimal tariffs, ensuring the North can receive supplies during this winter." "No. We would welcome that," Lady Mormont said, a surprisingly authoritative ring in her voice. "Our food stores are not limitless, especially if the winter is long." They continued in this manner, exchanging proposals and refining terms. The atmosphere was tense but civil. A sense of guarded hope emerged. For once, it felt like the tragedies of the past could be set aside in favor of pragmatic cooperation. Yet old wounds ran deep, and not every point was easily resolved. The matter of hostages, should any be exchanged to ensure good faith, arose. The Northern lords bristled, citing the horrors inflicted on them previously. Jaime suggested a simpler approach. No hostages, just a pledge by each side to maintain ambassadors in each other's courts. That, at least, seemed less hostile. They broke for midday meal, then resumed in the afternoon. By evening, the shape of a new accord had emerged. The North would remain under the nominal authority of the Iron Throne, but effectively self-governing, with Sansa Stark recognized as Lady of Winterfell and Warden of the North. Taxes would be a fraction of those paid by other regions, given the North's harsher climate and lower population. In return, the North would pledge troops in the event of a major external threat, and pay a small annual tribute in coin or goods. Above all, the old enmities would be laid to rest, and House Stark would officially recognize Jaime Lannister as King of the Seven Kingdoms, so long as no direct harm came to the North from the crown. After the final session, Sansa lingered, dismissing her companions. Jaime gestured for Mullendor and Virwell to leave as well. They found themselves alone in the solar, the dying light of day casting golden rays through the windows. She regarded him for a moment, eyes searching his face. "This is not what I expected," she said softly. He arched a brow. "What did you expect?" She folded her hands. "I expected a tyrant in Lannister gold, or a cunning manipulator like your father. Instead, you've listened, you've compromised." Jaime smiled thinly. "Perhaps I'm both cunning and a tyrant, but I've learned the cost of war is too high, and I don't want to be my father." He paused. "When I was younger, I believed the measure of a man lay in his skill with a sword. Now I see it's not so simple." Sansa lowered her gaze. "I've learned such lessons too. There was a time I dreamed of chivalrous knights and noble kings, only to find cruelty behind the crown." Jaime felt a pang. He knew she meant Joffrey, and by extension the entire Lannister hold on the throne back then. He cleared his throat. "I can't undo what happened, but I can try to keep it from happening again." She looked at him then, and for the first time, he glimpsed a flicker of acceptance. "If these accords hold, perhaps the North and the rest of Westeros can recover. The scars will remain, but we must move forward. For our people." He nodded, stepping closer. "Then we're in agreement. Let's finalize the terms tomorrow, sign them, and announce it to the realm. Let them see that House Stark and House Lannister can set aside the past." She offered a faint smile. "Yes, let's do that." They parted with a respectful inclination of heads. Jaime waited a moment, letting the gravity of what had just happened sink in. He had secured a peace with the North, an unprecedented compromise that might heal one of the greatest rifts. Yet it was only the beginning. Questions still lingered about Euron, about Dorne, about rumors of Targaryen heirs. And the realm faced a winter that could last years. But for the first time in a long while, Jaime felt a spark of optimism. He had not expected to gain the throne, nor to share a table with Sansa Stark as they shaped a new future. And yet, here they stood. That night, a hastily arranged feast was held to welcome the Northern Lords. Jaime knew it wouldn't erase the bitterness of the past, but perhaps it could mark a new chapter. The Great Hall was decorated with both lion and direwolf banners, a tangible symbol of unification. Sansa Stark arrived in a modest but elegant gown of grey and white, with a direwolf clasp at her shoulder. Her companions wore their house colours, from the Black Bear of Mormont to the Silver Fist of Glover. On Jaime's side, the Lannister crimson and gold contrasted sharply, yet he'd also displayed the royal banner that mingled the lion with a simple crown emblem, hoping it might show that his identity wasn't just House Lannister now. He was king of the entire realm. Toasts were offered, though the mood remained subdued as if no one quite trusted the precarious peace. Still, it was progress that the Northerners did not stalk out or fling accusations. Jaime made a point to speak cordially with Sansa, Lady Mormont, and even Lord Glover, acknowledging their concerns and reaffirming that the crown recognized the North's hardships. Some glances from the Northern Knights were openly skeptical. Others were curious. Over time, perhaps trust would grow. Partway through the feast, Jaime noticed Sansa, stepping away from the main table, drifting toward a side corridor. Feeling an odd desire to ensure she didn't wander the Red Keep alone, where too many ghosts lingered, he followed. She paused at a small gallery overlooking an inner courtyard, watching the flickering torches below. He approached quietly, clearing his throat so as not to startle her. "Everything all right, my lady?" She turned, meeting his gaze. Her eyes held a touch of sadness. "I was just remembering. When I was here before, it felt like a prison. I would have done anything to leave. Now I've returned of my own accord." Jaime nodded. "This keep has seen more than its share of suffering. I'm sorry that you had to endure those days." She let out a breath. "You were part of the King's Guard then. You must have known how Joffrey treated me, yet you never intervened." A knot tightened in Jaime's chest. He recalled the old hymn, too arrogant or too caught up in lust for Cersei to care. Or perhaps he'd told himself it wasn't his affair. "I was blind," he murmured. "Or I chose not to see. I'm not proud of that." Sansa studied him, then looked away. "I won't pretend it's easy to forgive, but if we're to mend the realm, perhaps we each must let go of old resentments. I lost much here, but I've gained strength as well." He glanced at her. "You've become a leader. The North clearly respects you." She nodded faintly. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm just pretending, if, in truth, I'm still that frightened girl. But I can't afford to show weakness. The North needs someone to stand for them." Jaime understood that sentiment all too well. "I feel the same about the crown. Sometimes I wonder if I'm worthy of it, but a king cannot show doubt." They fell silent, the distant hum of the feast echoing down the corridors. After a moment, he offered his arm. "Shall we return? If people see us both missing, tongues might wag." She gave a small, ironic smile. "Let them wag, but yes, we should go back." They walked side by side toward the hall. Jaime felt a strange kinship with this woman he had once viewed as a naive girl. The horrors of war had changed them both, forging something new from the shards of what had been. Whether that new bond would hold, only time would tell. The next day, the formal accords were signed in the throne room. Sansa Stark placed her seal beside Jaime's, while watchers from various houses bore witness. A few northern lords, including Glover and Mormont, added their marks. On the crown side, Mullendor, Veerwell, and a handful of others signed. Bronn stood off to one side, arms folded, looking faintly bored, but Jaime knew he was alert for any sign of treachery. When the last seal was pressed into the wax, a sense of accomplishment filled the chamber. Jaime stood. "Let it be known that henceforth, the North stands united with the Iron Throne under terms of mutual respect and limited autonomy. May this pact mark a new era of peace for Westeros." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Sansa nodded. "The North accepts these terms and pledges to uphold them, so long as the Crown does the same." With that, it was done. No bells tolled in celebration, no triumphant music soared, but the quiet sense of relief was palpable. Jaime knew they had taken only the first step. Such accords could be broken, mistrust could resurface. But at least, for the moment, they had chosen peace. In the days that followed, the Northern Party remained in King's Landing, finalizing minor details. Jaime made sure to supply them well, offering gifts of southern produce to take home. Sansa often consulted with her people, ensuring they approved each clause. Meanwhile, Jaime juggled other duties. Euron Greyjoy remained a threat. A new rumor circulated that a band of sellswords from Essos might land on the eastern coast, seeking fortune amid the uncertain climate. And the Vale's acceptance of Jaime's reign was still tentative at best. Yet the accord with the North injected a new energy into the court. Some lords began to speak hopefully of a true peace. Others whispered that if the North could be reconciled, perhaps the rest of the realm would follow. Jaime took each day as it came, aware that each small success was balanced by the potential for sudden disaster. One afternoon, near the end of the northern stay, Sansa requested a private audience with Jaime. They met in a small garden balcony overlooking the Blackwater. It was a chilly day, the sky grey, but no rain fell. She wore a heavy cloak of direwolf fur. Jaime wore a more modest cloak lined with Lannister red. When they were alone, she began. "We'll be departing soon. The roads beckon, and my people need me in Winterfell. But before I go, I wish to speak to you of something that might affect both our futures." Jaime tilted his head. "I'm listening." She took a measured breath. "You've heard the whispers of Daenerys Targaryen, or her possible offspring. The North has heard them too. Some Northerners wonder if a Targaryen return might set the realm ablaze once more. I do not know the truth of these rumors, but I've learned that where there's smoke, there's often fire. Jaime's jaw clenched involuntarily. Yes, I've heard them. Ser Balon reported that some in the Vale speak of a Targaryen restoration, but I haven't seen proof of any living Targaryen besides the old rumors about Daenerys, and no one is certain if she still lives, or if she ever bore a child. Nene. Sansa nodded. True, but we cannot ignore the possibility. If a Targaryen claimant emerges with an army, or, gods forbid, dragons, the entire realm would be in peril. The North has no appetite for another war, but we would defend ourselves. You would defend your throne. Jaime exhaled. Indeed, it's a threat we can't dismiss. What would you have me do? Sansa's gaze flicked to the horizon. Prepare, quietly. Build alliances. Ensure our armies are trained. Watch the seas for any sign of foreign invasion. If someone claiming Targaryen blood arrives, we must be ready to either negotiate or resist. I prefer negotiation, if they come peacefully. But if they come with fire and blood, we cannot stand idly by. And he studied her, noting the earnest concern in her eyes. Agreed. The crown will stay vigilant, and if you hear anything more certain in the North, send word. She nodded. I will. My hope is that it's only rumor. The realm is too fragile for another conquest. A thoughtful silence fell between them. Jaime found himself oddly grateful for her counsel. They were two survivors of a world turned upside down, now trying to piece together a kingdom that had repeatedly broken itself. He couldn't help but marvel at how fate had twisted, placing them in these roles of responsibility. Finally, she spoke again, her voice quieter. There's another matter I wanted to raise. Tyrion Lannister. Do you know anything of his whereabouts? Jaime tensed. Tyrion, his brother, the one he had freed from captivity, who had then fled across the narrow sea. I've had no direct word in ages. He was last rumored to be in Essos. Some said he served as an advisor to Daenerys Targaryen, ironically enough, but that was never confirmed. Idros claimed he was seen traveling alone. I wish I knew the truth. Sansa nodded, a distant look in her eyes. He was my husband in name only, but he treated me more kindly than Joffrey ever did. I wonder if he's alive. If so, he might become relevant again, if the Targaryen rumors hold any truth. Jaime sighed, gazing at the choppy waters below. If Tyrion has allied with a Targaryen, that complicates everything, but I won't condemn him without proof. He's my brother, and despite all that's happened, I owe him a debt. Understood. If I learn anything of him, I'll send word, Sansa said softly. He turned to her. Thank you. She offered a small, genuine smile, then gestured at the swirling sky. Winter deepens. Travel will be hard. We'll likely leave on the morrow. He nodded, feeling a curious pang of regret at her imminent departure. Safe travels, Lady Sansa. I hope our new accord holds firm. She met his gaze. I believe it will if we both will it so. The next day, the northern party prepared to depart. Jaime stood in the courtyard to see them off, gold cloaks forming a line. The weather was dismal, a cold drizzle spitting from grey clouds. Horses stomped, and the northerners adjusted their cloaks, preparing for the long journey back through the neck. Sansa, mounted on a sturdy chestnut mare, exchanged final words with Jaime. Our thanks for your hospitality, she said, voice raised over the wind. And for the chance to forge a better future. He bowed slightly. May the old gods and the Seven both guide your way. With that, the party trotted out of the Red Keep, through the city gates, and onto the King's Road. Jaime watched them vanish into the misty distance. A hush fell over the courtyard. He felt the tension in his shoulders ease a fraction. A major hurdle had been crossed. Now the question remained, would the rest of Westeros accept this new reality? Would the days ahead bring peace or new storms? He turned and walked back into the keep. Bronn sidled up beside him. Well, that was a lovely farewell. Going to miss her? Jaime shot him a sideways look. Don't be crude. Bronn chuckled. Merely wondering how you feel. You've hammered out a grand treaty, earned some goodwill, maybe a bit of admiration. Not bad for a one-handed king. Jaime didn't bother with a retort. He headed for his solar, thinking of the tasks that still lay before him. If the north was now settled, at least for the moment, he could shift focus to Euron Greyjoy's raids and the potential threat from any Targaryen claimant. And Dorne. That was a thorny matter yet to be resolved. Rumor said the Martells were all but extinct, replaced by new rulers who had no love for Lannisters. How would that fare in the grand tapestry of alliances? Another day began with the same swirl of decisions and strategies. Lord Verwell approached with an update from the Arbor. Euron had not struck again, and the Red Wine fleet was bolstered by the Crown's ships. Jaime felt a flicker of relief. Maybe the Ironborn would lie low. Then came word from the Free Cities that the Iron Bank of Bravos was interested in extending a further line of credit. Jaime weighed the risks of more debt against the need for funds to rebuild the realm and strengthen the navy. He had no desire to be beholden to the Iron Bank, but ignoring them might cut off crucial finances. He tabled the decision for now. As the days passed, the city quieted. The northern departure had removed some of the tension. A portion of the visiting lords from the Riverlands also headed home, content that the realm might actually stabilize. Jaime oversaw the finalization of the new City Watch structure, ensuring that some of the men were sworn to House Lannister, others from various houses, to reduce the chance of a single faction controlling the Watch. Slowly, methodically, he was forging a kingship that rested on balancing interests rather than outright domination. He still trained when he could, pushing himself to maintain his sword arm. The gold cloaks whispered tales of how their king had slain the mountain, and now bested men in the yard with only one hand. He let the rumors spread, hoping they would deter potential challengers. Meanwhile, Bronn oversaw the rotation of guards, ensuring Jaime's personal safety. That nagging sense of being watched sometimes returned, but no incidents occurred. Perhaps the would-be spy or assassin had fled upon realizing the king was not so easily taken unawares. One crisp morning, Jaime stood on a rampart of the Red Keep, gazing out to sea. The winter sun barely cut through the chill. The gulls cried overhead, and below, the harbor bustled. Though Euron's raids threatened, trade still arrived from the Free Cities, bringing goods and some measure of prosperity back to King's Landing. Jaime let the wind whip his hair and cloak. He remembered a time when he had felt trapped here, a glorified guard dog for mad kings and cruel princes. Now, ironically, he was bound to the city by a heavier chain, responsibility. Yet it was a choice he had made, and he would see it through. He heard footsteps behind him, and turned to see Maester Pharos approach, holding a letter with a broken seal. "Another message from the Vale, Your Grace," the Maester said. "They have deliberated further on the matter of a warden, but remain undecided. They do request more aid in reinforcing the mountain passes." Jaime nodded, taking the letter. The Vale's caution continued. He'd send them what men and resources he could spare. One day, a more permanent arrangement would be needed, but for now, making them feel safe was the priority. He read the letter, folded it, and handed it back to Pharos. "Tell them we'll send a dozen knights and engineers to help fortify the Bloody Gate, but no permanent garrison. That should satisfy them." Pharos bowed. "Yes, Your Grace." Jaime gazed at the horizon again. So many moving pieces. But the realm had known far worse. With a stable agreement in the north, a cautious acceptance in the Vale, the Riverlands mostly pacified, and the Reach beginning to recover, there was reason to hope. He dared to imagine a time when Westeros might truly be at peace, where children grew up without the sound of war horns, or the fear of swords at their door. Perhaps he was naive, but if he didn't strive for that, what was the point of all these sacrifices? Turning away from the parapet, Jaime descended into the keep. The day wore on with its usual demands. By evening, he found himself in a small library chamber, reading up on old records of trade agreements, trying to glean insights on how best to handle the Iron Bank's proposals. Candlelight flickered against the shelves. Bronn dozed in a chair, half bored by the sight of scrolls. Mullendor had gone to check some detail about taxes. Suddenly, a distant shout echoed down the corridor. Jaime froze, heart pounding. The shout was followed by the sound of running footsteps. Bronn jerked awake, hand on his sword. Jaime stood, pushing aside the scrolls. A gold cloak burst into the chamber, gasping for breath. "Your Grace," the man panted. "There's an intruder or something in the keep. We found 2 guards dead near the lower corridor. And Sile." Jaime's mind flashed to the nights he'd felt watched. Tension surged through him. "Where exactly?" "By the old dungeons, Your Grace. The watch is searching the area, but the killer vanished." Bronn swore under his breath, already heading for the door. Jaime was right behind him. "Bring more men," Jaime snapped to the gold cloak. "Spread out, but carefully. If this assassin is still inside, corner them." The corridor became a flurry of movement as more guards were summoned. Jaime insisted on going himself, ignoring protests that he should remain secure. The group of armed men moved swiftly toward the lower levels of the Red Keep, torchlight flickering on the stone walls. The smell of blood reached Jaime's nostrils before they even saw the bodies. 2 gold cloaks lay crumpled on the floor, throats slashed. The flicker of the torches revealed pools of dark blood. Jaime felt his stomach churn, but he pushed it down. "Fan out," he ordered. "Check every niche, every passage." The men spread out in cautious formation. Bronn knelt by the bodies, grim-faced. "Clean cuts. Whoever did this is skilled." Jaime nodded, scanning the shadows. "They might have come for me, or perhaps they were after something else." One of the gold cloaks came rushing back. "There's a secret passage. A door behind a statue, forced open, leads to the Blackwater Bay. Looks like the intruder escaped that way." Jaime cursed under his breath. The Red Keep was riddled with hidden ways, many of which even he didn't know well. If the intruder had knowledge of them, they could easily slip in and out. He glanced at the dead guards. Who were they? "Aldrin and Lass, Your Grace. Good men." Jaime closed his eyes. Their throats cut for no reason other than being in the wrong place at the wrong time. A flash of rage went through him. "Double the patrols. Check every secret passage you can find. I want no corner of the keep unguarded." The gold cloaks leaped to obey. Bronn rose, expression grim. "Seems your instincts were right about being watched. Someone's after something, maybe you." Jaime exhaled shakily. "Or something hidden in these dungeons. The Red Keep has enough skeletons in its closet." "Nay." They searched for hours, but found no further trace of the killer. Eventually, Jaime returned to his chambers, on edge. Bronn insisted on posting 2 guards right outside his door, and 2 more at the end of the corridor. Jaime did not argue. Sleep was impossible. He lay awake, sword within arm's reach, mind churning with questions. Who had slipped into the keep? A simple assassin? Or someone seeking lost knowledge, old secrets? He recalled Varys and his hidden passages, Littlefinger's intrigues, Clyburn's dark experiments. The Red Keep had an endless capacity for schemers. Morning brought no fresh leads. The gold cloaks scoured the keep, but aside from the forced secret door, they found no clues. Jaime convened with Lord Varwell and Mullendor, demanding to know how security had been breached. They had no answers. Anxiety rippled through the court. Whispers spread that a ghost haunted the depths of the castle, that the old sins of the Lannisters were coming back to claim them. Jaime tamped down such nonsense. This was a mortal threat, not a ghost. He ordered the city gates watched carefully, but King's Landing was too vast to seal entirely. If the killer had already escaped into the sprawl of slums and winding alleys, finding them would be near impossible. Still, he posted rewards for information, hoping someone might come forward with details about a stranger lurking in the keep. Days passed, and no further killings occurred, though the atmosphere remained tense. Jaime refused to be cowed. He continued his daily tasks, though with a heavier guard. He was a soldier, not a paranoid shut-in. Yet a part of him recognized that an unseen enemy lurked somewhere, waiting. Until that enemy revealed themselves, the best he could do was remain vigilant and press on with the realm's affairs. And so, in the hush of winter, King Jaime Lannister governed from the Red Keep, forging alliances, quelling unrest, contending with Euron's raids and rumors of Targaryen claimants. He walked a tightrope between fear and resolve, haunted by old ghosts and threatened by new dangers. Yet in each step, he found a quiet determination. He had spared Westeros another bloody war by reconciling with the North. Perhaps he could do the same with Dorne or any other would-be rebels. He had overcome the mountain in single combat. He had relearned to fight with his left hand. He had lost loved ones and illusions, but gained a crown he never sought. If he could survive all that, then maybe he could survive the knives in the dark. Each night when he removed the crown and set it aside, he felt its weight lingering like a phantom. But each morning he rose and placed it back upon his head, one-handed king of the 7 kingdoms. He recalled the vow he'd made to himself. To be better, to do better. Let them call him the Kingslayer turned king, or mock his missing hand. He would bear it, as long as the realm stood a chance of healing. Someday, if the gods were kind, the songs might remember him not as the man who killed a mad king, but as the one who tamed a broken kingdom and gave it peace. And if the gods were unkind, well, Jaime had never placed much stock in their mercy. He would walk his path regardless, sword in his left hand and the lion's crown upon his brow, determined to see Westeros rise from its ashes, one day and one challenge at a time.